I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. But I would just like to suggest that one can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that. But I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition of, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Thursday, October 3rd, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be following up on what's going on in Lebanon, the overlap with Iran, the important kind of coverage of how this is clearly continuing to escalate, while it seems that many parties who are typically called the terrorists in the room are the ones that are trying seemingly every possible way to pull this back from the precipice. And Derek put up a really great article today that we're going to point to. But we're also going to discuss something in the latter half of the show that I just mentioned briefly the other day. And even the discussion around North Carolina, the lithium conversation, the storm, I'm going to cover this in the latter half. And to kind of, one of those types of with the coverages we had in the past where it's like, this is what's being put forward. Let's get to the root of the point. Let's look at the facts. What can we prove around this conversation? Probably not going to be what a lot of the partisan viewers out there want from this conversation. And there is some interesting things within it. I'm the first person that's going to be willing to consider even the most crazy allegations, those crazy possible theories. But of course, we're going to end up with what we can prove. And if we don't have things to back up these claims, then it has to end up where we don't know if that's the case. What I always see in these conversations, and just right out of the gate, I'll tell you that there is interesting overlaps, but in regard to the usual things we tend to see, government land grab conversations and possibilities of, really the biggest thing, as I said yesterday, is just malfeasance. Just the absolute shocking reality of how little your government cares about you in real disasters, whether natural or not, and while dumping billions in the hands of dictators, oligarchs, despot country, like just the obvious, the diametric opposite of what they want you to think that they are, that we are as Americans, clearly because they act this way, right? But realizing that they'll let you suffer, let your family suffer, just even like the infrastructure side of this, why these streets are falling apart because there's a storm. Like, let's recognize that your government, whether local or federal, clearly is not focused on your interest as a priority. And I think that's one of the biggest things we tend to miss when looking for a larger story. Just like with Lahaina or East Palestine, there are bigger parts to the story, but immediacy of the, right now, there are things that should be local level, parts of the government, or even from the FEMA level, or the Tennessee version of that, or with North Carolina, that these groups are doing things that should shock Americans. or even just the money and the flow, how much we pay in our tax dollars, and how in the moment there's always some reason why it's just not there for you. These are the things that we should care about, and we should recognize that there are people that are padding their pockets throughout this process when they, it's sort of like an insurance company. That you'll spend so much money over the years pretending that you're protected, and then the moment that you need it, they go out of their way to try to find a way not to help you. That's just exactly what your government does. I mean, it's what the model is. But we're going to go through all that and get into some of the other conversations as well. The idea of the lithium, the possibility that this might have been, first of all, that the lithium is there and what that might have driven people to think or do or take advantage of situations, or even the larger point about the weather itself and whether it's possible this could have been manipulated. All of these things, no matter what you may be thinking right now, are 100% possible. I mean, scientifically, technically, just the fact that our government would absolutely throw you under the bus at a moment's notice. But does that mean they happened? Well, I'll let you decide that with the facts. But it's important to think like that today. There's so many people. And so many people out there, someone just gave me a hard time about doing that. I do it often. My mind jumps and I don't finish my point. There's so many people out there who are, they just would fool you for the smallest benefit, that would lie to you and deceive you and get you thinking they're just for the smallest gain in that moment. And I mean, people out there that would love to project themselves as being the most altruistic, helpful. There's a lot of manipulators out there. Question them, question me, question everybody. That's how we have to be. But we have to realize in all of this that there's a lot of other dynamics going on. And any time, and I mean literally any time you see a massive partisan focus, at least acknowledge that means that you're guaranteed to have people using that. So that doesn't mean that has to be fake. That it could be, like, the larger possibility. But when you see this weird focus, whether left or right, on any story, my point is that you will have the people within that, the individuals online who just want to get clicks and shares, the people in government that want to get some benefit from funding or lobbyists because of this story. You will always have people who try to take advantage of your suffering for their benefit. And that's my point, is the moment I started to see this get weirdly focused on, and then all of a sudden, like usual, the usual characters out there start cobbling together narratives. And, we saw it with the Trump shooting discussion. We were 14 stories down the road before we even knew the base facts about what was going on. And that's, I think, by design. Again, as always, we should never shy away from asking those questions. But when we start to realize that we're digging into the theories more than even caring about the facts to begin with, maybe we should see that we're being misled, or consider that that's not in the interest of the truth. And I'll leave it there to start. But it's important, I think, that we don't lose sight of how important the larger worldwide dynamics are. Now, you can obviously decide what you think is most important in your life in this moment, or just decide that you just simply don't care about other things, or I don't care what's going on in the world. That's completely your prerogative. And really, it's not for anybody to say is right or wrong. It's up for you to decide. But I think it's objectively important that we stand back, and because there's a lot of this kind of partisan push right now to say, oh, well, why are you, like, for example, Kim Iverson is, I think, doing good work around Israel, but she talks about a lot of things. What's funny is that the people that don't like that she's talking about Israel tend to frame it as that's the only thing she thinks matters in the world. That's just not true at all. I get similar points, but as we will see today and plenty of shows, there's a lot of things we talk about. But I think what's interesting is what that's really showing you, at least as I see it, is that's something that they will never talk about. And that's why they want to frame it that way, as you see her talking about plenty of other things, but they seem to never highlight that. Or the conversation of funding about North Carolina and everything else. A lot of the right-wing conversation is saying, well, all this to Ukraine, but only this for them. And then weirdly leaving out the higher number that went to Israel and has always gone to Israel. It's interesting, the omission there. But just recognize all the the overlapping discussions for a lot of these things, but how the point being that people will always try to manipulate you within these stories to benefit themselves. But we're going to start with the overarching Lebanon worldwide conversation, Israel, the growing threat, and how this matters to your life. What's going on in Lebanon, or just the fact that these are human beings in the world that are suffering using your tax dollars. But even if they weren't, this should matter. This is an objectively worldwide important story because of what's happening. Now, if we argue that, well, these imaginary lines we call borders, even though there is the point being that we should care about cultural differences. I mean, these things all matter, but let's realize those are imaginary lines based on governments and politics and so on. The point being, if we pretend that this makes, anything within this line matters to me more than anything out there, again, it's up for you to decide, but I would argue that we should stand back and think to ourselves, shouldn't it matter that hundreds of thousands of innocent people are being murdered? And then comparing that with something like this, and even say, like, because this is local for me, comparing the two things, one's objectively more important in the world. Now, even that saying that's probably going to bother some people, and I don't really know why. I think it's obvious that this is a monumental story. So I'm just saying that in the context that let's stand back and make sure we don't get pulled in to some hyper-focused partisan story while there's even from an American perspective. I would argue that even like the lithium conversation, the possibility of manipulation of weather, these are huge stories. But that even just the malfeasance of the government, that's a huge story. But even that in and of itself, I would argue that there's objectively more important things right now happening inside the United States that get less focused because of the partisan over, like I said earlier, the idea that weather itself becomes this big hype story. Fox News is just going wall-to-wall coverage on the death and the suffering. And it's just like, I find that kind of gross personally. But anyway, so let's start off with the point about a couple of scattered points I wanted to make sure we included, and then we're going to start right off with the updates on what's going on around Lebanon, and of course the fact that an American was just killed in Lebanon, which is where I wanted to start today because of how, as always, it should not matter more that an American was killed in any context than anybody else. Is despite the unfortunate, sad, the fact that is what we're forced to. Let's put it this way: that the Western media would constantly put forward as the case. Without even saying it half the time, but clearly we all see that. That's not the case. Human life matters no matter where or how, what they look like, what their religion is. But what's important to see in this context is the U.S. government's taken action that has allowed this to happen. And then bigger for the people acting like one side or the other is more important for America. I mean, both of them are doing that, but obviously one is the one acting like make America great again. The point being is that this idea is very contradictory when you see that they're supporting a group that just murdered an American, an innocent American, as well as a lot of other innocent people, both Lebanese and Christians and Jews and all sorts of people. And they are more important to them to focus on supporting the government of Israel than to acknowledge that that is something that, I mean, you can't call that America first, can you? And I think that's a really interesting contradiction. And I think a lot of Republicans are having a hard time with that story, or the hundreds of Americans that were killed in Gaza, none of them seem to care about, or any of the American politicians seem to care about. So first, I wanted to give a shout out to an upcoming event that I'm looking forward to. This is going to be November 1st. Well, technically the 2nd, but I'll be there on the 1st. It's the Voluntarism Conference. Now, this is being put on by Etienne. I know his other name, De La Boutine Squared, I think is how he says it, but he's a great guy. Really insightful. I mean, I've met him a lot of times over the years in different events, and this will be the first time I'll be able to join one of his. And you'll see, as you see, Derek will be there. Corbett, I think, is doing remote, but he'll be there speaking. Larkin Rose, who, again, I have yet to play our interview, but for obvious reasons, I just don't want it to get buried by what's going on in the world because it's sort of evergreen, what we talk about, just the idea that voting and authority are illusions. Anyway, I'm going to be doing an interesting event here. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do this, it's important as much as I don't label what I think, and I actually think it's important not to, because you get forced into kind of boxing yourself in. I've got opinions that stretch all around left, right, middle, or anarchism, libertarian. I think that's how it should be. I think you can align with different opinions, and sometimes that's why these kind of categories evolve over time, because you realize, well, people that think this way tend to be in this sort of category. But realizing the more you grow, the more you realize that there are differences and nuances, and sometimes you do agree with what this person might say in this category, but you get the point. In saying all that, I want people to know that I very much, as I'm sure you all do by now, am leaning far more toward the point of anarchism. The idea that authority and government in and of itself are bad, or the idea of agorism or voluntarism, or the idea of, peer-to-peer exchange. Like, we don't need some authority telling us how to live our lives. And so I wanted to make sure that I did that scene. And so not just being able to speak, I'm going to be doing a behind the scenes sort of all day event, which I'll probably regret signing up for because it's going to be longer than even my show. It's going to be, at least I think so, it's going to be the whole event. So as the event's going on, I'll be behind the scenes doing like a green room interview with each one of them before they go on, as well as doing some like live kind of walking around the audience, like, kind of the backs round kind of thing, which is going to be kind of fun. It's a new thing for me. And it's going to be as well with me doing other content of my own. So I'll be interjecting parts that I have to say, or interviews I'll be doing around the side. And on top of that, the point is it'll all be free, because I think that's important because it'll be going through TLAV website and so on. But if you want to sign up for the event, which will be behind a paywall, as they've decided, you'll be able to sign up using a code that I'll include, which I think is right here, Ryan5. and you get to have a discount to join the event. But that'll help TLAV, right? So whatever you want to do, you can join me. You can watch our event and engage with this and see kind of part of what they're going to talk about. But if you want to see Derek and how, or Etienne and James and their different, and Larkin and their speeches, you can sign up for that if you want to and join their event, and then come back and watch me for the rest of that kind of thing. It'll be fun. I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be an interesting kind of on the fly thing where I'll be asking questions and so on. So make sure you check out for that. It's a month away right now. I'll be chatting it out as we get closer, and I will have a page on TLAV. So, because as much as this is this event, the way Howard or Etienne and I discussed it, it's going to be sort of a, through TLAV event that we're doing on my channels. And it'll be, so it'll be fun. It'll be a really interesting thing. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm glad he invited me, and it's sedonaartofliberty.org is the website. So on top of that, I wanted to make sure you saw one more thing before we started. I think I've already told you this, but just because it's just funny how many times we've been censored, which I objectively don't know anybody I've ever worked with anywhere or even heard of that's been censored as many places I have. And I think that's just an objective reality. TikTok censored us completely, but I don't know if I mentioned it, so I just want to include it. But you can see here's the website itself, or the URL, and it just says this could not be found. I think I've told you that, but I think it's funny. Of all places, TikTok, right? Isn't that supposed to be the China website or whatever else? But see, funny how TLAV gets censored by all of them, because I think we're inconvenient for power structures, which is what we all should be striving for, not just one side or the other. Another note is Fluoride Action Network put an important statement out. Now, we've already talked about this. Derek has been killing the story from the moment it started, like well before anybody on any media structure was really talking about it, for the most part, outside of other than those that have been doing it like him for a long time. Fluoride Action Network, again, FAN or Fluoride Action Network being the kind of the driving force for why this just happened. Again, if you haven't seen it, they won in court, and Judge Chen himself put out a statement saying, paraphrasing, fluoride is dangerous for you. Okay. It is a neurotoxin. It is dangerous, and it does affect your children's IQ, period. That's important to make sure you understand. It is a neurotoxin, and they've just found that in court, federal court. And the problem is they fought for the last year to make sure it stayed in your water. That really is the moral of the story, and that's terrifying. So imagine what else. This audience is probably well aware, but Fluoride Action Network put this out today. And this is what I want you to take away from this. This is powerful, because what we're seeing, whether or not the Arkansas government locally cares or not, and this is what I'm point to make about Israel. You start to see people recognizing the writing on the wall. Now, first of all, I'd like to believe that they're just a local government that cares about their people, but you know how jaded I am about government in any sense. But the reason I say that is because whether or not they do, when you start to see things shift, when you start to see the world and the media and everybody else recognize that Zionism is failing, not because they exposed it, because they've known they don't care, they're lying about, but now they see that we're calling it out. The mass movement, people around the world, the growing awareness is changing. So they go, well, we can't keep pretending it's a good thing, even if we think that, because they don't think that, and they're the people that basically pay our bills. That's actually not accurate today, but you get the point. The influence is what matters. And so they start changing their story. That's powerful. Now, in this case, we're talking about, I guess, sort of the enforcement arm. It's the government side of it, but the idea, it's not the same thing. But in this case, we're talking about local versus federal. It's kind of the point I'm making, that they're now pushing back. It says one water district in Arkansas serving more than 5,000 customers has now refused to add fluoride to its water system as required by state mandate, which is technically not the same thing. That's like a mask mandate, right? But the point is that technically this has not trickled down yet. The ruling just happened, and they're still kind of sussing out what the levels will be. And they're just going, okay, we're not complying. Look at that. A local government, I will not comply. That's powerful. Again, like I said in the beginning, whether you think they care or not, this will start to trickle up, down, however you look at it. This will snowball. People will start recognizing that they're more important to their constituents, whether or not you think the vote translates. It's about power. It's about influence, about perception. So they'll start doing it. You want to get elected, or rather be, again, whatever you think about it. The point would be that you start going, hey, I'm the underdog, but guess what? I'll take fluoride out of your water. I think Zionists are killing people. Oh my God, everybody supports me. And you start to see the politicians see the writing on the wall. They start doing the same thing. All of a sudden, the maniacs out there that have been in power forever because they towed a line that they were, you do the right thing, you say the right thing, right now is dynamic, you get those positions. But the one by one, when people start seeing that they get more and more, well, even if Zionists are going to attack them, they'll start coming along. So I just really want that to resonate for the larger story, whatever we're talking about. you're having an impact out there. What you're doing, what you're saying, even if they don't care about it, you can force them to change. And I think we're seeing that right now. Now, it says, as a result, the Water Authority has been fined $500 a week, but they're doing it anyway. Board Chair Andy Anderson said on September 30th that he had just opened the latest bill. The fines now add up to $113,000. Despite that financial pressure, they're standing firm. That's actually pretty crazy to me. I mean, I'd like to believe that they just care. For whatever reason, the anomaly that it is, that's powerful. So you're making a difference. Don't forget that. Now, another point that I want to share was this is interesting. Now, this is a more of a sad point, bad point, negative point. It's what we've been telling you. Now, my perception of the Trump administration, which in my opinion is the same thing as any administration, Kamala Biden or whatever else, but I just see them as the chosen next step. That's my opinion. But I think it's very obvious the concerns about what during COVID-19, the Republicans would freak out about almost every single thing that all of them represent if it was a lefty. Everything, leaning into electronic vehicles, or the idea of every checkbox for the Great Reset, or the idea of the brain machine interface, or the idea of surveillance, or Israel. I mean, every single thing we've talked about would be a problem if it was coming from somebody else. But because it's Elon and Vance and Thiel and Trump, it's all just ignored. So here, Daniel McAdams highlights what I think this was Michael Tracy speaking with the lead for the transition team for Trump. I'm only going to play the first little part of it. It's about 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 6.5 minutes. Is, as Daniel McAdams says, this is all you need to know about Trump 2.0. The personnel is the policy. He says, after what you hear what this guy says, based on this, there is zero chance he will be putting together a foreign policy team that is actually pro-America. One of the main reasons, because Jared Kushner is helping find the talent. Jared Kushner is an open rabid Zionist. I mean, and this guy, he's the one that was behind the architecture of the ridiculous deal of the century, and it was a flop. I mean, it was a lie. It was a wildly pro-Zionist. It was pretending that the current dynamic is a two-state solution. That's pretty much what it was. So I'm going to play the first part. So it's more than just that. It's about the idea that this is the opposite of what anybody would have asked for should you have asked what Republicans wanted before this statement. But now, because this is how it's designed, you're going to hear the same things. Well, you got to have people from the inside to fight the inside. Well, how'd that work last time?
Mr. Lutnick, sorry. Thank you for the pronunciation correction. Yeah, Howard Lutnick, Cantor Fitzgerald. I knew to know that. I recognized you without even having to look it up. So you're the co-chair of the Trump transition team, is that right?
That's correct.
So in the first Trump administration, a lot of lobbyists got appointed to prominent cabinet positions. Mark Esper, Defense Secretary, for example, was the top lobbyist at Raytheon, lots of other examples. Is that a philosophy that you would want to see perpetuated in a second Trump administration? Would it differ? What's the status of that?
No lobbyists are part of the transition. So
just so you know, I don't believe it for a second. And you'll hear as he goes on, it gets a little more abstract. This is simply how it works, ladies and gentlemen. You go back and look as far back as you want. I mean, whether it's Obama and Citibank or whatever else the point you want to make, this is how it works. If you think for 1 second they're not going to have, it's going to be, there'll be a rationale, right? There'll be something Trump says that makes them go, oh, that's why it makes sense, even though it won't. It's just whatever he says will fill the blank, just like always, or Biden or Kamala or any of the rest of them. They do the same thing, where suddenly you don't want these oil lobbyists on your Democrat side, but suddenly they say, well, we need this because they're, oh, okay, well, it all makes sense. That's how it happens every single time. And in this case, I don't believe it. You're going to have all the same problems, just like we have every other time, whether it was Trump or anybody else. This is not unique to Donald Trump. This is how American politics works. So he's going to go on to make it clear that that's pretty much a lie.
I don't think so at all. I think we have the greatest group of potential, people who want to serve that you've ever seen. We have the leaders of America, from technology, pharmaceuticals, business, defense. They're all...
Oh, good. Okay, so big pharma, defense, so pretty much all the people we don't want in power. Got it. Technocrats, big pharma, defense contractors. Why is that a successful thing? You see, the problem is that these people want to pretend that, this is my point about, as always, that, Trump is a businessman. He does not take it. Look, you read his books, you look at his past actions, or look at his last administration. He loves to act like he's for the small guy, and he wants to bring things back to America. I can promise you that if it comes down to a profit, it will go the other direction, or what he thinks is a better business deal. And they'll all go, well, yeah, it just makes sense because it made more money or whatever. And the point is, well, that's the exact opposite of what you said we needed. But now because there's a narrative there, people in the partisanship lie to themselves. Or rather, I would argue the people at the screaming top of the team sport politics side of it do that. And then people on their sides feel obligated to follow suit. Either way, why is that what we want? It's not. I mean, if you listen to what RFK was saying about what he would have chosen, it's not that. It's not the leaders of big pharma and defense. That's not what we should want in power. But guess what? That's what it's always in power, because guess what? That's who's in power. It's not Trump or Biden. It's who he's outlining. And also remember, he's just the guy that's putting together transition. He's not the one that actually chooses. That would be Trump's administration or Trump himself. So mark my words, when it happens, and there'll be a narrative for it.
All willing to serve. You saw Elon Musk is willing to try to help. And
I don't know why anybody pretends that's a positive thing, but I guess, the fun narrative they built around him is why.
Take a cabinet position?
No, I think he'll be an advisor, right? And he's going to help build technology because he wants the efficiency of the U.S. government. You've got,
of course, because they know what he wants, right? Because we all know what his intentions are, right? We just talked about this as I think it was Sam Husseini calls it political mind reading or media mind reading. They're just trying to present for you what to think. You can say he's doing this. You can't say he wants to do this. Now you can say he said he wants to do this. To pretend we know what he wants or what anybody's intentions are is childish. That's not journalism or whatever, from his side of it. But either way, I want to point out that if he gets, whether it's an advisor or an actual cabinet position, they're still that's still part of the government. So when that happens, which technically it's already sort of up in the air right now as this goes forward, at what point does that become a problem for him expressing what he's doing on Twitter? Now, I'm not saying you should restrict free speech, applies, but from a government perspective, that changes the dynamic, right? If you're out there talking about foreign policy or driving with massive influence actions around government, then how is that different than him censoring people from foreign governments influencing our policy? It's not. But I promise you there's going to be a line drawn where he just doesn't apply to Elon, which, like everything else.
amazing people trying to help. And they're all focused on it. And so we will have the greatest administration you've ever seen. And it's really been, it's so much fun, shockingly fun, because everybody wants to help. And there's just no friction.
So no lobbyists in a second Trump administration?
I would not expect people who are lobbyists to be a material part. You can't say none.
Okay. Now we're walking it back a little bit. Maybe some, you know how it goes.
4,000 people joined.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Senior level cabinet positions, let's say.
I don't think so.
And is that a concerted decision that was made somewhere along the way to sort of break from what the approach was in the first administration?
I think with respect to transition, no one associated and as part of the transition is a lobbyist. So we don't have lobbyists as part of the transition.
Yeah. Except all of the Israeli lobbyists who are literally dictating. I mean, Mary Madelson is seemingly holding his hand as this goes along. And he himself called her a lobbyist, even though she's technically not. I mean, depends on how you want to frame that. She's not part of some massive. She is a Israeli oligarch who is funding his campaign in the interest of getting West Bank annexation, which everyone knows and nobody seems to care, even though that's shockingly illegal. My point, though, is that there's no way that you can't see this happen. This is where it's going to go. It's already happening. And by the way, just because you want to pretend that somebody like Mark Esper, for example, they didn't call him a lobbyist necessarily, even though he is. It's the revolving door. Half these people are lobbyists already, or they're currently in a position they'll be lobbyists when they leave, or vice versa. This is how it all works. This is your corporatocracy, right? This is not what we pretend it is. Overarching point at the end, he mentions Jared Kushner, which is the point that Daniel McAdams is pointing to. Obviously, that's going to lean in the direction you think it will, just like last time. But this worries me that we pretend it's any different. The main point is it really doesn't matter who they pick. They could pick the who's who of the worst people you could possibly imagine, and it'll be good because Trump picked them. That means he knows something we don't. And if you think that's different on the left, you're lying to yourself. It's the same way it always goes. It's a good choice because they know something we don't. If they picked them, therefore this is the right way. And they'll do it like they do every single time. So just recognize that. It's all going in the direction that you expected if you've been paying attention. And then one last note that you just have to make you laugh about, which shows you how absurd everything is. Like we live in an actual clown world. It's not just the United States. World news. And this appears to be real. I mean, I only say that because of these day and age, it seems like even corporate media gets tricked by, like Pompeo and the rest get tricked by comedians. It just seems, bottom line is, this is being roundly reported that Vladimir Zelensky is being nominated for a Nobel Prize. I just don't even understand how we can't, like, even Obama had to push back when he got it. He said, he's like, I don't deserve that. It's just, this is sad. This guy is a monster like the rest of them, and he is actively ahead of one of the most openly Nazi governments that we've ever seen in, living memory for, like, was how rather. Yeah, I think living memory is the right way to say that, because obviously we're talking about post-World War II. But the bottom line is, because right, I'm 83, I was born. The point here is that clearly this is not a person that deserves a Nobel Prize or a Peace Prize or anything. He is a puppet that was put in place by a terrifying force that has no interest in anything other than their own occupation, their own interest. And then, I wonder who gets nominated, right? They're just trying to paint a picture historically. You know what I've said so many times over the years? History is written by the winning hand. It's a line I wrote in a song. It's been said many ways before long before I wrote that. But I just think that it's obvious, right? Whoever ultimately wins wars, history, they're the ones that write down the way you want to think, the way you want to look at how it's. That's why Winston Churchill was an amazing leader. No, he was a horrifyingly bad person. But who cares, because we write the history. It's not unique to UK. It's pretty much all of them. But I think that's an interesting point to start at. Right? Just recognizing that everything is a lie. Okay, so let's talk about Lebanon first. And I want to start with the point of the American that was just killed, because I'm not seeing anything. Your government's not saying. Imagine if this was the other way around. Imagine if there was an American citizen who was just sitting in a building in Israel that was bombed by Lebanon or Hezbollah. What do you think would happen? Well, we already saw what would happen. We saw that with the American-Israeli IDF members, that they had ceremonies for it, 3 days long of all these discussions when they were part of the military fighting a genocide or conducting a genocide. But of course, you can have endless examples of Americans, whether Palestinian or not, but Americans or Palestinian Americans who were being killed in Gaza. Not a peep. Brian Mast out there, no, he only cares about Israelis. Right? That's very clear. He's part of the IDF. That's an American representative who's literally part of a foreign military. I mean, this is terrifying that we can even pretend that we have to have a conversation about how obviously wrong that is. Instead of just going, yes, we can all see that. We have to debate that it's somehow appropriate for them to ignore Americans killed by a foreign government, right? America first, right? I mean, this should really be a come to Jesus moment for a lot of people pretending that's what's happening. So the Jerusalem Post, I want to start with this because we just talked about this in the last show. The Israeli government made a point to restrict the airport. Okay, they restricted under a guise of weapons importation. Okay, which probably. I mean, you can call it a valid claim, but the point is that that's not all that happens in this civilian airport, if at all. We're talking about civilians, both Americans, Lebanese people, even Israelis, people from other countries that are trying to leave Lebanon, right? And they said no. And of course, instead of, the American government stood up and said, no, how dare you? You can't stop a foreign country from leaving their own airport. You can't stop Americans in Lebanon from leaving. We're no longer your ally. No, of course, that's not what they said. The U.S. government meekly followed suit. And they said, okay, well, we're not evacuating U.S. citizens at this time. There's a commercially available flight, though, if you want to pay for it, even though Israel's blocking them from flying out. That's what happened. That's disgusting. That's the U.S. Embassy from Beirut, literally saying, Americans in Beirut, you can pay for it if you want to leave. We won't help you, knowing that Israel was blocking the airport. Think about that for a second. You think they care about Americans more than Israelis or anything? If they're literally letting you stay there while they allow a foreign government to block your route as they pretend you can pay for it, assuming you had the money to do so, assuming the banks were working. I mean, think about how crazy that is. So that brings us to the point of today. While they did that, which means that the U.S. government is explicitly complicit in allowing this person to be killed, because maybe they would have flown away. Maybe they would have been flown out had the United States actually done its job. American killed in Israel's military campaign in Lebanon, says the family and U.S. lawmakers. This is from yesterday. An American from Dearborn, Michigan, was killed in Lebanon in an Israeli airstrike, according to the man's daughter, friend, and a U.S. congresswoman representing its constituency. This really needs to be one of those moments for people. And again, it shouldn't matter any more than the other Lebanese people that were killed in the same strike. But this matters from an American perspective for people that believe in American politicians. This should make you livid, especially since they're not having press conferences about it. Matt Miller and the rest are kind of blithely dismissing it like we don't know, we're going to investigate, when they never follow up at all. Their job, as they would tell you, is your security. American national security, American interests, right? Protecting Americans at all costs, unless they actually have to do that in the face of Israel. So, right, just in case you missed the point, for the 47th time over, if it bumps up against Israel, you don't matter. Your own government would ignore your life if it goes against Israel's interests. So maybe we should ask whether they're even your government anymore. Let's really reflect on how alarming this is. Now, the Cradle reported, as of today, 1,974 martyrs. Now, remember, all that means is people killed, despite, what's his name? Josh Hawley and the rest of these absolute morons in Congress screaming falsehoods about what these things mean, because they're just grandstanding and trying to make it seem like when the person in front of them was just trying to say, no, there's nuance and those have meaning. And sometimes it could be, they go, no, how dare you not scream the thing we just told you to say. It means somebody who was killed. Yes, it could mean somebody who was acting in military capacity. It could mean somebody who blew themselves up, or it could mean a child that was killed in their bed. All of those apply because that's what it means. Martyrs simply mean people that were killed in this dynamic. Easy to look up. And that's why the Cradle is reporting it as these martyrs, people that were killed. Most of them all were, the vast majority were civilians, including 127 children. So those children were in that martyr number. And 261 women, and 9,384 injured, over 10,000 casualties since the beginning of this aggression on Lebanon, just this most current version of it. There's no misunderstanding this. I don't think we even need to convince anybody anymore what's really going on. We just need to make sure we find a way to stop these belligerent genocidal governments. Now, I want to include some things from the last show, in case you didn't see it, that are really important to understand what's going on. One is that even the Washington Post and other corporate media are making sure you understand, despite the lies, they're hitting military targets. Glenn Greenwald says every one of the confirmed missile hits in Israel documented here by Evet Hill was aimed at an obviously legitimate military target. Ask yourself how far Israel has lost the plot when even the corporate media that they're buying, funding, lying, threatening is calling out that they're lying. That Iran is not aiming at civilians. That, in fact, they're just explicitly aiming at military targets, and then Israel is just lying about it. He says there's a fundamental difference between that and flattening apartment buildings, UN buildings, schools, and refugee camps. So not only is Iran explicitly aiming at military targets, as Robert covered in an article I'll point out in a minute, but you can prove it. You know why? Just like I told you before, this is not Gaza. There are people all around in Lebanon, people filming, people showing what's going on, people going after the fact, which I'll show you today, going, where were the tunnels, right? Where's the missiles, right? If you keep telling us all these were, where are they? This is going to come out. There's no way they can hide all of this, but the clear point is this is how desperate they are. They're thinking 10 seconds ahead of their situation. So on top of that, as Mencho Sint points out, don't forget one of the main locations, and I think there were 3 main locations they were targeting. For those that don't know yet, the Nevatim Air Base is or was, depending on the full validity of the claim, some people are arguing it was completely destroyed. That does seem to be the images and the things that I've seen. At the very least, it was clearly hit. But some are arguing it was completely taken out. But it says was where Israel was receiving American bombs that were killing civilians in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, everywhere. Which there's nothing, there's little else that's about as military target as it can get. And then he shows you, the raining down on these locations. Now, Furqan points out that a Lebanese journalist has gone around, this is as of yesterday or today, visiting the sites that were bombed by Israel. And this is the point. You can watch the whole video and showing you that there's nothing under there. Now, of course, this is people that don't want to see. They're going to say, he's lying, or he hit it, or it's been removed. The point is this is going to come out. People will do investigations largely from Lebanon, I imagine. And this won't be like the Beirut blast of last time, where everyone just ignores what they show you. This is a worldwide discussion now. Israel's made that the case. And so they're going to go and show you that there is nothing under these locations. There's no tunnels. There's no bombs inside. And you could argue some of them might. I haven't seen any evidence of that. But the point is they're bombing, carpet bombing, like always, entire civilian blocks. So when you can show that, let's even put it this way. Let's say you go back and look and find, here's a bomb in this one house, but weirdly the other 7 buildings didn't have any. Well, even if that alone, that's end of story. Even if they were to find one, that means they bombed 7 full buildings of people with nothing under them. My point is that I don't think any of that's there. That's what I think the evidence shows. Regardless, there's no way around this. You can watch the video for yourself. They're just showing you that there's nothing there. Dan Cohen points out, as I said the other day, turns out that Iran is the most moral army in the world. And what he's showing you are the facts, which is that Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon, and this was back on the 1st, had killed 500 people just that one day. BBC dedicated 10 minutes to it. Iranian airstrikes in Israel with 0, even according to Israeli media, 0 known victims. BBC Evening News dedicates an entire half hour. There's no comment needed. That's crazy. And here's even CBS News. U.S. and Israeli officials, both of them, said there were no reports of Israeli civilian casualties. Now, what's interesting is you could easily say that was because they tried to frame it as they were untouched. You didn't get us. We won. You're too weak. Either way, either it's a lie, which that's what they do all the time, and you're just showing you they're dishonest, and they hid their own casualties to make it seem. But I think it's the reality. I think it's obvious that there were no casualties. They aimed at military targets, and whatever you think it is, even Israel said that. So how can you pretend like this was indiscriminate, that they were bombing civilian targets, or that there's any moral equivalency, as they love to put in the other conversation? There's not. There's one side who is clearly killing civilians at a rapid pace and one that's not. End of story. Now, what the media hides, writes 200 Iranian missiles, at least that's what Israel is mostly saying. I think Iranian kind of said dozens, which I guess could reach that level. 0 Israeli victims, according to everybody. The entire West condemns it. Israel kills over 1,000 Lebanese people in previous weeks, and they say nothing. Do you understand it yet? Do you get what you're looking at? You should. Now, Philip Proudfoot, going into some information from today, he says, I want everyone to understand what happened in the last 24 hours. Israel completely failed to illegally invade Lebanon and was forced back by Hezbollah. In response, they dropped chemical weapons on civilians in Beirut and leveled apartment buildings after apartment buildings and bombed Gaza, right? And Syria, by the way. We'll get to that next. And he just highlights the Dahaya doctrine, mowing the lawn, right? What they do, and a lot of times it is just because of petty reaction, that they feel stupid, they feel slighted, they feel that they're weak, so they just murder people. And as Low-Key just recently said on an interview, I think it was Piers Morgan, the point is war is meant to be, how you view a win is if you end up coming out of it and more people believe your perspective than anybody else. And the problem is that they're not. Objectively, they're failing at all this because everything they do is causing more people to see what they are and more people to hate what they're doing. But his point is what they do is aim and murder the weakest of the population, right? So they do this and it's killing the children and the sick and the women. That's what they do. That's what Zionism is. And so mowing the lawn it's their own policy. If you actually read what they say, this is just they just go in and mow the lawn every so often, kill a couple of people, let them know we're still there. That's what they would tell you. And they've said this on interviews before. So people down below asking about chemical weapons, he's talking about white phosphorus, which, by the way, I even included that image on my main image for the show yesterday. I didn't end up talking about it. It was just one of the many examples, and it's not even remotely new. Understand, this has been going on long before October 7th. Pelham pointing out Israel bombing a health authority center in Beirut with white phosphorus. They've used chemical weapons containing white phosphorus on at least 17 villages in Lebanon just since October 7th. The Geneva Protocol, which prohibits the use of chemical weapons in warfare, was signed in 1925. Now, before the people that try to misrepresent the situation pretend that you're allowed to use this, well, first of all, it's outrageous that that's even the game they play. This is a weapon. This game that you could use any number of more effective and less dangerous things to signal or to light an area. So they pretend, though, that you use this at certain times to signal or light up an area. But then look, see the images you're looking at? Well, those are during the day and over civilian areas, which mean they are explicitly illegal. That is as illegal as using sarin gas. It's a chemical weapon. That's the point. It may not be as dangerous, but it is horrifyingly deadly, and it will melt the skin off children, which is done many times, which is why they use it. You want to listen to them talk about it? They've made statements, guys. The bottom line is this is not new, and it's provable. This is October 12th from Human Rights Watch, white phosphorus used in Gaza and Lebanon. And realize, guys, look at the picture. This is during the day, over a civilian building. There's no way, no matter what the narrative around it, that would make that legal. And they know that. No, they just don't care. That's why if you read Human Rights Watch, they're saying this is egregiously illegal. This is a massive war crime. Use in populated areas poses grave risk to civilians. So, yes, when they use chemical weapons as a response to hurt people because they feel slighted or because they want to hurt people because they're losing, that should show you what they really are. Now, let's not forget, on top of all of that, Times of Israel made sure you understood that Netanyahu used everybody. He used, as they reported, this is Times of Israel, the trip to New York, the entire United Nations conversation. They used that to, quote, they use it as, quote, part of a diversion so that Nasrallah would think he was safe. Like I said in yesterday's show, using diplomacy as a weapon of war, under the guise of diplomacy, murdering innocent people, which that was the case. This is not a terrorist we're talking about, despite all the BS you hear from people in the West and partisan morons. The reality is that this is a massive, like, listen, even if you think he is a terrorist, this is such an egregious crime. What you're doing is using the United Nations, using the guise of ceasefire, which so there's just nothing sacred. These are terrorists, ladies and gentlemen. That's what they are. So Blinken would have you believe the difference between us is that we believe in international law, and they don't. Except you don't, though. In every possible way, you don't. And again, the ceasefire conversation was also used, pretending that they were working towards a ceasefire, so they thought something was changing, or using the United Nations setting, and where, by the way, which is where he ordered the assassination. It's overwhelmingly clear what these people are. And now Cristian Amanpour from CNN, who I have a low opinion of, had an interview with somebody from Lebanon, the foreign minister. And he reported to CNN that they agreed. This is a new development as of yesterday into today, which, by the way, I think was already pretty clear. But the new part of it is that Nasrallah apparently had publicly agreed to a ceasefire, which I think adds to the story. So not only do they use the ceasefire dynamic and the New York UN part as a diversion, but they let him agree. They pretended to agree. So he thought a ceasefire was in place, and then they murdered him. That's what they do. That's why when Donald Trump invited Soleimani, or rather used Saudi Arabia to invite him to, under a guise of diplomacy, he bombed him on an international airport. Who do you think drove that into reality, guys? That was Israel. Everything about that was illegal. So why would anybody else take diplomacy at face value from the U.S. or Israel? Why would anybody not do the same? Why wouldn't they invite them and then murder them because that's what they're doing? Now, nobody should agree with that. Nobody should advocate that, because that is the worst of the worst. That is terrorism. Let's not forget where it actually originates from. But let's realize that this is a big deal. Now, here's a clip that I'll play for you of a journalist asking Matt Miller about it. And you'll get the same wishy-washy nonsense. But let's realize, here's the actual interview or the clip of it from that discussion, that they know this. They know what they're doing. They know what they're covering up. If this was Russia, you damn well know what the conversation would be. They wouldn't even need to have any evidence. They would have Israel telling them Putin did this, and they would scream about it for a week because they're children.
His foreign minister told CNN today or yesterday that Hassan Nasrallah, before he was killed, had actually agreed to the 21-day ceasefire that the U.S. had been putting together last week. Is that accurate?
So I can't speak to whether he ever agreed to it and told somebody inside Lebanon. Obviously, that could be something that happened that we wouldn't be aware of. I can tell you that if that's true, it was never communicated to us in any way, shape, or form.
And
it's important to realize what he just admitted right there, as we already knew, they were in the process. Okay, so that alone is an egregious, it's a crime, but it is a, what's the right word for it? A violation of the process itself, right? The idea is that they were in this conversation. Now, I believe this reality. I think that it was accepted. I think that's exactly what we already knew based on the previous information. But even if he hadn't, the point is that they were in this process. So to be of the mind that in the middle of trying to reach a ceasefire, that you could be assassinated by one of the sides pretending to seek it, is everything we're talking about. Why would anybody ever enter into agreements with them ever again? So all he's demonstrating for you is whether or not it was agreed to. This is a major violation of that process and a crime. And they know that. Just you apply the exact same logic and the exact same dynamic to any of their adversaries, and you know damn well that Matt Miller would wax intellectual about it for the last half hour about how it's a crime and how egregious it was and how we can't allow these people to exist every time.
you guys met with Secretary Blinken met with Lebanese officials.
He did.
in New
We were
York
having a number
and
of
specifically discussed this 21-day ceasefire.
So that's what she's saying. So you were there, you guys met, you talked about it. It was in the process, is the point she's making.
we were having a number of conversations with Lebanese officials as well as with others in the region. And I can tell you, at no time was it ever communicated to us that Hezbollah had accepted a ceasefire.
But they were giving you confidence.
And ask yourself, do you think they would be honest with you if they did know that? I mean, really? Is there anybody in the world that would balk at pointing that out? We all know that they're liars. We all know that they would easily, blatantly, knowingly lie to you to hide this for Israel. It's amazing that should be contentious. It's not.
That Hezbollah had accepted a ceasefire.
But they were giving you confidence that they might, but it wasn't necessarily from Nasrallah.
So we were having a number of diplomatic engagements to talk about the proposals that we were going to put forward.
Right.
I think all of the parties.
I mean, what a stupid way to say that. So you were having meetings with the other side to discuss what you might bring? No, that's what you would do on your side, and you'd come to the table to discuss the actual deal. Like, yes, the point is he's just trying to really make it sound like nothing was happening. But the problem is, before this, they were screaming that they were getting close, and it's always the other side that doesn't want anything to happen. You see how they will tell you what they want you to hear on either side of the narrative. It's only Hamas that won't let it happen, except we find out today that nope, actually Matt Miller, I should even play that clip again, how embarrassing that is. Matt Miller comes out and says that we never wanted a ceasefire with Hamas, but the only reason it happened is because Hamas didn't come to the table. It's like, are you really that stupid? Apparently that's the best they can do.
Were well aware of the proposals that we were going to put forward, but at no time in those conversations did we get a message that Hezbollah had agreed or was going to agree to it.
Or Nasrallah himself.
Yeah, or Nasrallah himself. Well, I mean.
So here is today, ongoing, indiscriminate bombing of Lebanon. The aftermath of Israeli strikes in San Therese in Beirut. I mean, it's really shocking that we can just going through the motions again. Is there missiles, or tunnels, or human shields? Do we even care? The U.S. government is just allowing genocide, which we all know, just destroying yet another location. I hope to God that somebody's held accountable for this. Glenn Greenwald points out, and we showed you this the other day, Bernard Henry Levy is saying Israel's not invading, it's liberating Lebanon. And as he says, that's exactly what this same individual, the same swamp creature said about the invasion of Iraq. We all know how that worked out. They're screaming about the virtues of American liberation, right? Or the exact opposite, as we destroyed or the government destroyed everything in that country and is still illegally occupying it and has been destabilizing them ever since and allowing Israel to do whatever it wants. That's what it looks like to be liberated by the U.S. government. That's what he's saying, is we're going to liberate Lebanon. Pro-Israel fanatics and U.S. interventionists always depict the flattening of apartment buildings and killing of huge numbers of civilians as liberating them. It's insulting. Now here is Netanyahu, 22 years ago, and I've played this before, arguing that the U.S. invasion of Iraq would have, I guarantee you, he says, enormous positive reverberations on the region. Just like he's saying now about Lebanon.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age, something new is happening.
And that is speculation on your part, or you have some evidence to that effect?
I was asked the same question in 1986. I had written a book in which I had said that the way to deal with terrorist regimes, with terror, was to deal with the terrorist regimes. And the way to deal with the terrorist regimes, among other things, was to apply military force against them.
The way we did in Afghanistan.
The way, for example, I want to answer your question.
Well, I guess I'm running out of time, so I quickly was trying to get to. We've done, I think, what you proposed in Afghanistan, yet I haven't seen that sort of neighborhood effect.
Well, I think there's been an enormous effect.
Oh, has there? Yeah, because Afghanistan is a shining beacon of democracy today, right? No, but they leaned in with the bad guys, right? The very people they said they were going to give rid of, Taliban's now still in power, or Syria, or Iraq, or any number of them. They supported the very entity that we now recognize as the problem in every single dynamic. or whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the moderate rebels or any number of examples. That's who they are. He's literally telling you this is a person who is driving U.S. government to take action to its detriment, to your detriment, for the interest of Israel's prophetic future. That's what it is, right on the surface. And either these people are too stupid or too bought off or too blindly pro-Zionist to recognize all of this that's happening. I mean, look at how much information we have going back to this point. One country after another, or Libya, for example, over and over for the interest of Israel's agenda in the Middle East.
The effect was, we were told that there would be a contrary effect. First of all, people said that there would be tens of thousands of people streaming into Afghanistan, zealots who would be outraged by America's action, and this would produce a counter-reaction in the Arab world.
But I think you're not saying that when you take an action like we did in Afghanistan, we're going to see all the other countries just fold.
No, what we saw is something else. First of all, we saw everybody streaming out of Afghanistan. The second...
Yeah, because that's what they want. Just like we see in every other location, every single one of them. Like we're going to see right now from the 1 million+ Lebanese that are being driven out of Lebanon. They're going to end up coming into Europe and the United States. Those very people will turn around and say, they're the reason they're coming in to hurt us. Their fault. No, it's your fault for supporting this maniac. That's the reality. But most of them know that. They love to play it both ways. We blindly support Israel, then we demonize the people coming in because of what we did and how we supported Israel. And they'll make them out to be the villains. All of the right-wing people you could think of right now will scream about how they're military-age males. And let's put it this way, though. Even if that is an agenda within it, guess who's doing it? You're staring at it.
The thing we saw is all the Arab countries and many Muslim countries trying to side with America, trying to be okay with America. The application of power is the most important thing in winning the war on terrorism. If I had to say, what are the three principles...
You see where Trump's mindset comes from?
...of winning the war on terror? It's like, what are the three principles of real estate, the three L's, location, location, location? The three principles of winning the war on terror are the three W's, winning, winning, and winning. The more victories you amass, the easier the next victory becomes.
Yeah, how'd that work out? I mean, it depends on how you define victory, right? He sees it as victory because he got this country to bumble in and do its war for it and is completely, in every possible step, been to the detriment of American interests. Every way. You point out one example of what any of these wars have done for the American people. By their own accounts, it has made you less safe. Even by American think tank accounts, there's more terrorism today than there was before they started this war on terror. Maybe because it was a war of terror. Sort of like the war on drugs that actually grew the problem because that was the point. We are being played by this person, but by a lot of individuals. But the bottom line is, if we don't start recognizing as Americans that your own government is acting against your own interest, then we will never stop this problem. We'll get to a point where I see building right now where I don't think we'll be able to work back from it. Honestly, I mean, this is why I think this is why they're doing a lot of what they're doing, because a lot of us are beginning to see through the lies. So they need to put us in a position where it won't matter anymore.
The first victory in Afghanistan makes a second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier too, but it may change the nature of achieving that victory. It may be possible to have implosions taking place. I don't guarantee it, Mr. Turney, but I think it makes it more likely.
Yep. They're staring at the responsible party, right? Hundreds of millions of innocent lives around the world as they scream about individual. Think about how many people from the war on terror. We're talking hundreds of millions of people that have been killed direct or as a consequence of their war on terror, around the world, all for the interest of Israel. Now, Lord Bebo points out this video. This is of Matt Miller. It's just the hypocrisy, discussing the fact that obviously one of the main central things we've seen is the focusing on civilian infrastructure. And what he's talking about is how we're now seeing it again in Lebanon. And this is the fact that we just keep dragging this narrative along. Everyone can see what's happening. And now let's realize there's not human shield. There's not hostages. So what is their narrative now? That Hezbollah is just forcing them all to stay there? Well, they really tried to say it in the beginning, but not even the corporate media picked it up because it's ridiculous. They're just bombing innocent people in Beirut. And everyone's just pretending like that somehow makes sense. And now as they're bombing hospitals and civilian infrastructure, like everywhere else they're bombing, he tries to play it like it doesn't matter.
On this, the reports of this strike on in Bashura in Beirut overnight, which is a very residential area, reportedly Hezbollah linked the Islamic Health Organization. in which local reports say 9 people were killed. I mean, have you got any assessment on that or any more information?
I don't. Obviously, we want to see hospitals and healthcare facilities protected. I don't know any of the underlying circumstances related to that strike, so I certainly can't speak to it.
Because it feels like...
I mean, think about even saying that and then looking at every single hospital in Gaza being bombed and attacked and destroyed, every one of them. Some of them are still semi-functional because they've just continued to work out of some hole in the ground because that's all they can do. But the bottom line is that every single one of those, as he'll explain right now, were obviously illegal. By the way, even if you believe their claims. But that's on top of the fact that we can prove that they've lied about them. The doctors from these locations. Here, I'll play this really quickly since I want you to hear what he says next in this context. Because what he's about to tell you is explicitly stated from international law that it shows you that even if they were Hamas members, even if they were, that it would still be a crime the way they conducted this, which you already know. It's what we've been saying from the very beginning. But it's important to hear this again, that there's doctors that were there from other parts of the world that are screaming to you that they saw that there was no Hamas there and they killed people anyway.
Every single part of the hospital has been destroyed. The whole infrastructure of the hospital has been destroyed. When I spoke to Marwan yesterday, he told me there were 107 patients still in the hospital, 60 medical staff. God only knows what has happened to them. I think we've seen some of the pictures. Surgeons I know have been executed in the last 48 hours there. Bodies have been discovered in the last 12 to 24 hours who have been handcuffed with their arms behind their back. And so there is no doubt at all that multiple healthcare workers have been executed there in the last few days.
You believe executed by whom, Doctor?
By the Israeli Defense Force.
Why would they seek to execute surgeons and medical professionals?
Well, they've been doing it since October the 7th. Over 450 healthcare workers have been killed. Friends of mine that I have worked with over the years. Many have been abducted as well, and nothing has been heard of them since. So there is no doubt in my mind, and I can bear witness from this from my time at Al-Aqsa Hospital and from talking to people, that there's been direct targeting of the healthcare system in Gaza, direct targeting of hospitals, and multiple killings of healthcare workers.
Any death is tragic, but this is not, and I say again, anyone dying in any sense. So this is not, and please don't be upset by this expression, collateral damage. This is specifically targeted, you're saying, medical professionals by the IDF to be taken off and executed, is your belief?
Most certainly, that is my belief.
Have you at any time seen anything that would lead you to believe that there had been terrorists who were hiding in the hospital?
Without exception, every single one has responded to say they have never witnessed any Hamas militant in the hospitals they have worked in.
Without exception. Now, that's just about Al-Shifa he's talking about. But that's Nick Maynard, and he's worked at others since. And they're all telling you the same. Now, as this is playing, I'll include the thread where I have many doctors that are saying the same conversations. But what he goes on to say here is, reading from international law, you can clearly see that no matter what the narrative they're putting forward or explicitly what they're saying, it still makes what they're doing illegal. And now this is happening in Lebanon.
Strike on in Bashura in Beirut overnight, which is a very residential area. Reportedly, it has Hezbollah linked the Islamic Health Organization, in which local reports say 9 people were killed. I mean, have you got any assessment on that or any more information?
I don't. Obviously, we want to see hospitals and healthcare facilities protected. I don't know any of the underlying circumstances related to that strike, so I certainly can't speak to it.
Because it feels like the phenomenon we saw in Gaza of healthcare facilities being targeted may now be happening in Lebanon.
It's funny how he says targeted, and Matt doesn't even push back on that. Like, we're supposed to be being told that they're human shields and they're using them as military centers. No, as we all know, and even the corporate media is telling you they were targeting hospitals. It's just funny how that's just like casually the reality. The point is, even Matt, we know that, guys. That's the point. Now that it's kind of shifted away, they're just focusing on the new propaganda focus. We want to make sure you're misunderstanding what's happening in Lebanon. We don't care if Gaza were past that. I mean, I think these people all recognize that they're in a really dangerous spot. They're complicit. The world sees it. They could end up in a jail cell tomorrow. And so I think this is just about maximizing the illusion, the propaganda, but they are targeting hospitals. That's obvious. With the amount of evidence we have, I can't believe anybody even has the gall to pretend otherwise. But all you're getting is a bunch of rabid Zionists lying to you about things online and people that are following it for their own interests. I mean, look around. It seems like everybody everywhere is recognizing what's actually happening outside of people in political interest and Zionists supporting it, or people that are just not caring enough to look.
And so, you know, the bar under international humanitarian law is extremely high. So I wondered, you know, how closely you're looking at this and what conversations you're having with the Israelis about.
So I just can't speak to the circumstances of the strike because I don't know. But I will say, when it comes to Gaza, there are circumstances where not the Israeli government, but the United States assessed and had definitive evidence that Hamas was operating outside of hospitals. And
no, so you were there, Matt, on the ground? No, I know exactly what they're referring to. They were repeating what Israeli intelligence said, which is what they do every time. We worked with our counterparts and they assured us their investigation. That's what every time. And interestingly enough, they're the party that we're investigating. So you're asking the person possibly guilty to investigate what they did and let you know if they were guilty. That's how dumb this is.
Had built bunkers underneath hospitals. So
yeah, how did Al-Shifa work out? Did that work out? Or did they end up showing you a waiting room with a gun on the table? And even the corporate media laughed at him. But Matt Miller following suit.
We want to see healthcare sites protected, but at the same time, you know, at least in Gaza, we saw Hamas actually operating outside of a hospital. It's not to speak to this strike because I don't know.
Not true. They operating. See, you could claim that there are tunnels or they're working, but the claim that you can prove they were operating, period, false, lie. There's not been evidence in any of these contexts to prove that claim. Even the UN and other people made this point. And that's why they came out and said, look, it's on you to prove that they're using these before you bomb them. That was in the first couple of weeks. Never done that. And still to this day, the only evidence we have is that they are simply murdering civilian people and executing doctors, as everybody seems to be telling you, including the doctors that are there, including human rights groups, including aid workers, including everybody but Israel and their blind supporters.
I don't have any definitive information about it, but just an important point about the
but I think it's
incidents in Gaza.
It's important to ask the accountability question. I mean, Article 9 of the 4th Geneva Convention, but you talk about protection ceasing if it's used for hostile intent. But that is only after due warning has been given, naming in all appropriate cases a reasonable time limit, and after such warning has remained unheeded, the fact that sick or wounded members of the armed forces are nursed in these hospitals shall not be considered to be acts harmful to the enemy. So even if it is a Hezbollah-linked organization, the medics are there treating, you know, potential militants, whatever, that's still not high enough bar to attack it.
And just so he's clear, he's talking about, as we know, as we can prove, aid workers, UN members, doctors like Nick Maynard, they are there. Israel just says that there are Hamas there too. So somehow that makes it okay to murder all these people, or the people in beds, or the babies in incubators, all of which we've seen. So what he's saying is that does not, like, explicitly, that's actually important to make sure we understand that according to international law, even if they are Hamas or Hezbollah members who are being treated, that does not allow you to bomb the building. We went through all of this in the first so many weeks. Like people like Francesca Albanese from UN Rapporteur, they were telling you there's nobody in international law agrees to anything you're doing. It's collective punishment. It's a crime. And they just said, we disagree. So you have the experts and then you have the politicians. And you should consider for yourself based on your due diligence, but point is you should not be taking either one at face value. But it's interesting how politicians who have a clear interest in a political outcome for themselves are the ones telling you that the evidence isn't showing you exactly what it is actually showing. That's where we are. The evidence is obvious, but the politicians go, not true. And people who want to be political, left-right team sport politics or blindly Zionist support, you get where this goes. This is how frustrating it's become with all these stories. Even the conversation we're going to get to next, like the evidence is there, and then seemingly everyone loves to focus on the narratives, the theories, which are, there's a purpose to it, but not at the expense, not in lieu of the verifiable facts that start the conversation.
Once it is attacked, there has to be, you know, a huge amount of warning given and enough time for people to leave. So I asked the question because are you getting a sense from the Israelis that they're doing that? And we've seen this one here overnight.
I'm fully aware of the provisions of international humanitarian law.
Yeah, we know you are. That's why we know you're violating them.
I just don't have the underlying facts about this strike and why they made this strike and what they believe they were hitting and what they actually hit.
Okay.
And then what's important to recognize there is, okay, so that would imply that he cares and we're going to find out, but he won't. If nobody follows up, they'll never look further. They'll never ask another question. They'll never follow up and say, here's what they invest. They don't care. They're not in the interest of finding out what happened in that hospital, but they'll be driven to tell you what Israel said about it and act like that's definitive if you push them. The reality, though, is it's like every other situation. The evidence on the ground is clear. They're bombing hospitals. There's no military target. Look, we just saw this with even corporate media around the Iran versus Lebanon bombings. Iran aimed at military targets. Israel did not. That's objectively the case. Now, I'm going to include this thread of all these doctors all telling you the same thing. All of them saying they're shooting children, they're targeting civilians. It's incredible. Now, here's by the way, I've shown you, Haaretz recently wrote an article talking about how Israel used human shields. I've given you countless UN articles and human rights groups going back decades saying Israel uses human shields, when you have very, very little, if at all, evidence showing you the opposite. Doesn't mean it's not happening, but doesn't it matter that there's such flimsy evidence and all you get is narratives from Israel who keeps getting caught lying? Here is Haaretz in an older article from 2021. It says Hamas with question mark. It's Israel's leaders who are hiding behind civilians again. My God, it's incredible what people can ignore. Now, Sarah Wilkerson, going into today, is pointing out, like a lot of people have been highlighting, this is she says less than 10 minutes after the evacuation order. So we just heard them talk about this. Even if you think it's packed full of Hamas members, if it's a hospital, they have to give ample time for people to get out of the way. The problem is, even if let's just say there are Hamas members or Hezbollah, Israel doesn't want to give anybody time because then they can leave too. They've even said that before. So that means they want to kill civilians just so they can also kill these people. But my point would be, I don't even think they care. They're not distinct. There's no distinction. They're killing people in Lebanon, just like they're killing people in Palestine. Because you fill in there's plenty of obvious reasons, whether it's pettiness or just the fact they want to just murder all these people. They want to take the Lebanese territory. The point is that 10 minutes after they gave an evacuation order, they immediately started bombing the Burj al Barajneh area, the south suburb of Beirut. Every time we've seen this proven by UN, by human rights groups, by people that were present in Gaza, aid workers. Not UNRWA, but aid workers for example, World Food Program or WCK, telling you that we see these things happening. Giving in Gaza, countless examples of giving leaflets that had contradicting information, that were telling them to go to an area that they then bombed, or telling them to go to a place that they knew wasn't safe. All of this is happening. And the real point to make is they bomb everywhere. We already know this. They bomb where they are, they bomb where they're told to go, and they bomb along the way. This has been going on since day one of this post-October 7th discussion, and frankly, for 75 years plus. But here we are again, where they're just going, get out of the way, and then bombing them up as they're picking up their belongings because they don't care. They want to give the illusion of process, but make sure they hurt them as much as possible because that's who these people are. The Savior points this out, and here's just the video. Strike in Beirut's Deya area a short while ago was bigger than the strike that assassinated Nasrallah, says a Reuters source. And you can see this is what they're doing in Beirut right now. This one's just more sound, I think. Yeah, you see in the background. There it is. So they're bombing all over Beirut, just like they were every other day before. This one, again, is recent. This is only from a couple hours ago. Airstrikes on Beirut are insane, it says. You realize, guys, this is a densely civilian populated area. See, just to understand, Iran, for example, even according to corporate media, is aiming explicitly at military targets, and they just lie about it. Here, we've got Israel bombing a suburb in Beirut and just going, but Hezbollah has stuff there, or narrative, or they're using human shields with no evidence to back it up. So on one side, everybody can see the military targets, and they go, but no, you're missing the reality. They're lying. So narrative, facts, and then narrative. And every side, the narrative is coming from the Israeli government saying, no, you're lying. Don't trust your eyes. Ignore everybody. They're all racist. How do you not see this as just shocking desperation? And then just murdering, constantly bombing people in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, by the way. And we'll come to that in a second. Now, Robert just put this article up today. Why Iran's retaliatory attack on Israel was justified. Now, I'm sure people will find that contentious. It's not. What's crazy to me is that it's contentious to point out the law. Now, I don't care what you think about Iran. Probably if you believe anything Israel's saying about them or the U.S. government, you're probably believing a lot of lies. But understand, like every government that exists, I don't support them. I don't believe in government. I don't think these people are on your side. I just don't. That's not to say good guy, bad guy, but the reality is clearly, as we can see, that as Robert writes in this article, as everybody with an objective stance is telling you, Iran is acting as the adult in the room here. They're actively trying to de-escalate. That's why they accepted a ceasefire deal and did not respond until they found out that they were being tricked. And that's before the last time we just discussed. That's in response to the assassination of the Hamas leader, right, in Iran. They vowed to respond. Then they were told, okay, we have a real ceasefire coming. This has already been reported by corporate media as well. And that's why they chose to wait. And then they assassinated people. They murdered innocent people. And Iran said, okay, well, clearly they were lying. And then they responded, right? And then they got tricked again and said, no, that's why Nasrallah went to the building under the guy. Now, you could say tricked, or you can say that they just recognize how dangerous this is and don't want this to escalate like Israel clearly wants it to. And so they hoped maybe they will, and then they killed him. Same time, over and over. So what he's talking about is the reality that from a legal perspective, it was a completely justified response. From every possible perspective, what they're doing is measured, and it is a meticulous, measured response that is arguably meant to de-escalate. And the context of that is to show you that we told you we're going to bomb you in a couple of hours. Is that what somebody does when they want to maximize suffering? No. It's clearly because they want them to see it's coming. They want them to be able to stop it. They want to minimize any possible fallout so they can then say, okay, now can we start de-escalating? We responded. We retaliated. You get to make it look like you succeeded somehow by acting like it's weak and you could barely hit us, even though it's not what happened. I mean, actually think about that for a second. Even when they warned them and said, we're going to bomb you, they still were able to get through all of their defenses, and they still were able to semi-destroy one of these bases. Think about that for a second. That's probably why Netanyahu's hands were shaking when he was reading that letter, because you're going to fail. That's why they're desperate to get the U.S. to blindly step into this. But make sure you read this, because it's not contentious. It is an objective perspective on the reality that Iran, whether or not you think is capable of the worst things in the world, right now is demonstrating the opposite. And everything they're doing in regard to this is being proven to be what you would expect. Right, let's put it this way, what the U.S. and Israel pretend they're doing. And that's not a pro-Iran or Iran supporting concept. It's just an objective statement of the current facts. Now, President Biden put this out saying this morning, this was yesterday, I joined a call with G7 leaders to discuss Iran's unacceptable attack. I'm just showing you how ridiculous people are. And by the way, Trump is exactly in the same mindset. Unacceptable is only when somebody responds to Israel aggression. That's what that word means to them, apparently. Against Israel, and to coordinate his response to an attack, including new sanctions. Right, so you sanction the Iranian government for responding to an Israeli assassination that was illegal, or the bombings that were illegal, or the occupations that were illegal, or its entire existence that is illegal. Who cares about those legal realities? Let's just make up a story about Iran that we can't prove and claim they're doing things that we can't see, or this is how everything. How long until we start recognizing narrative versus fact? He says, I reaffirm the United States' ironclad commitment to Israeli security. Why do we have a commitment to a foreign government security? I don't know. Maybe we should reflect on that. Marco Rubio, of course, says Israel should respond to Iran the way that U.S. would respond to some country that launched 180 missiles. Even though, bottom line is he's saying that the U.S. government and Israel should respond and attack Iran. These guys are belligerently dangerous. Even though it was a targeted strike towards military targets that was in response to an attack. And I mean, there's nothing about this that is even escalatory. But the bottom line is he wants them to attack because he is either being driven by Israel to do this, or he actually wants this to boil into something that hurts Americans. He says, as they should do in Lebanon, what we would be demanding our leaders do. No, most Americans would not. You maniacs would, if terrorists were launching anti-tank rockets at us from a neighboring country, forcing 60,000 Americans to evacuate. Yeah, he's talking about illegal settlers who have been raping and burning people alive, who have been forced out of illegal territory and are living in hotels. Not the people in Gaza, for example, who are all barely surviving and starving to death, riddled with disease, who are currently being bombed, has been displaced 14 times since October 7th. Who doesn't care about them? Or how about the Lebanese people who have been occupied by Israel for a long time, who are currently being driven out of their homes? 1 million people who are being, and he's talking about 60,000 people. And that's actually not the right number anyway. Think about how crazy that is. I mean, it's just so obvious that those people don't matter. Only Israelis matter, even over Americans. As Kim Iverson writes, are you an American or Israeli? These should not be contentious points, guys. We need to start being real about what this shows us. Now, Syrian Girl puts this interesting clip out. I don't have the exact date on this, but clearly this is from a while back. You can tell just by the resolution. It's not that far back, but it's not recent. But Israel wants Americans to fight Iran for them. Now, if there's ever a point that shouldn't be contentious, this is right on the surface of the conversation. But this is corporate media talking about it.
And what he really would like to happen is Israel sits back and the Americans do it for the Israelis. It would then be internationalized. He knows that Israel will be attacked, whoever does it, but they'll be attacked less. And what he's most worried about is the retaliation.
Talking about Netanyahu and Israel, that's pretty wild, right? But we know this. And what's funny about it is they know it too. They're just doing their job, which is to obfuscate the facts. That's what corporate media does. For whatever reason, they wanted you to think of that right then. Today, they don't want you thinking that. But it's the truth. They're using you, Americans. How about, you America First Republicans out there? Maybe you should concern yourself with the fact that Americans will be coming back in flag-covered coffins for an interest of a foreign government. Nobody should want that in any context, let alone for a government that doesn't care about you, that is actively parading, is talking about it to its own people about how easy it is to manipulate Americans into doing things for them. Now, I'm not talking about a Jewish thing or an Israel. I'm talking about an Israeli government discussion. Netanyahu on multiple videos has been caught bragging about how easy it is to play the paradigm against itself, to use the two-party illusion, to get them to do whatever they need. And in a smug, sort of laughable way, like you guys you're so easy to play. As we just saw an American killed in Lebanon. I wonder if Trump said anything about that. Did Biden say anything about that? No. Now, here's probably one of the reasons why. Sam Husseini points this out. More I think about, the more this seems to be a full endorsement of an expansion of the settler imperial project. This is Walls, and a quick clip saying the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have steady leadership there. You realize what he just said? This guy is a huge gaffe, in my opinion. Or maybe there's a reason they want you hearing this. The expansion of Israel? Well, isn't that exactly what they're all desperately telling you isn't true? The Greater Israel Project? The only way Israel can expand would be taking somebody else's territory. Well, duh, that's what we're all showing you. Whether it's Syria or Palestine or Lebanon or Jordan or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or many others, they're all publicly telling you that that's what they want to do. And yet, either too stupid to know we just let that out of the bag, or they want you to thinking about this now. But what he's talking about first is expansion of Israel. That's alarming in and of itself. But that the expansion of Israel and its proxies. Okay, what are we talking about exactly? Now, Sam, this could be what he means, is thinking settler projects. But I don't see that as proxies. I see that is Israel. Even they identify that as who they are. So who exactly are we talking about as proxies? Maybe the Egypt leadership? UAE leadership? Because the countries do not support Israel, clearly. But I think that's probably what he actually means. The proxies, which is funny enough, exactly how they frame Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas of Iran, even though that's not even remotely the case. I think it's every accusation is a confession. I mean, it pretty much what seems to happen today. But he says proxies could mean right-wing Christians in Lebanon, al-Nusra type nut jobs in Syria. He's right. It could mean those things, but I think it's a combination of all of it. But I think the real point is that we can't deny, because, we could debate about what the proxies may mean, and that's alarming in and of itself, but the expansion of Israel. Wow.
Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there.
Right. So in other words, we need to regime change countries that we don't like the leadership of because that's what we want. Democracy, right, guys? Yay, freedom and liberty. Let's take over these countries and steal from them because it's childish that we pretend like we can't see what they're doing. And I think a lot of them do. They just don't want to admit it because America, right? We can just take what we want because strength through, it's the same kind of thing we see building yet again through the Republican channels. Peace through strength. Or maybe escalation through de-escalation. Funny how it's the same conversation. All that we're seeing here is the mainstream endorsement from the vice president for the potential cabinet of Kamala Harris that we need to lean into Israel expanding, which is a huge deal, which is what we're seeing, whether it's the West Bank or other countries, and let their proxies essentially be taking leadership positions in other countries. Or, as he's saying, the moderate rebels in Syria or Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which are their proxies. Either way, it's no different than the right. It's the same thing. Walls, I just think, is just too clumsy. But they're all leaning into the same dynamic. Now, Hadi also, we already made this point, but he just has a great tweet here showing you the actual image. But the settler program in Israel is openly, proudly telling you that they're going to take Lebanon, just like they were telling you they're going to take Gaza, which they are. And even though realized well before the current October 7th forward point, they've already occupied Gaza. Just so we're clear about that. Anybody who is pretending that that's not the case is either really, really uninformed or deliberately lying to you. Going back to this, and by the way, even the larger conversation, I dispute with other people that are mostly on my side. It's been occupied since 1948. Just realize that whether or not they physically did this or took this piece of land, since that point forward, Israel has claimed ownership over Palestine. And going back to the original UN documents, that was the point. They occupy, they took it all. And of course, then it comes, you can go forward, 67 forward, for example, on the West Bank and Gaza. The point is, it's just a constant variation of the occupation. But either way, the point is they want you to believe, they want you to know they're going to take Lebanon. Israeli settlers are rallying to promote building settlements in southern Lebanon. Here, they even have graphics for it now. This is real, guys, as they want you to believe that it's all just liberating Lebanon as we steal everything like they do every time. Now, Adam has a point just about Iran I think is important to include. He says nearly 70% of Iran's science and engineering graduates are women. Most Americans think women can't even go to school there. Totally brainwashed. It's really sad how shockingly uninformed a lot of the partisanship are. And both sides, mind you, left and right, because realize that it's just your government. And the game, all of your government, both left and right, lie about Iran, lie about foreign policy, blindly support Israel. There's a reason why. But that's interesting, isn't it? All the screaming about women's rights and all, it's compare that to other countries or the reality. And look, there's plenty that I could point out about the problems there. We've gone over many times in the past. A hijab conversation, the reality of what it means, and that there are some people that disagree. There are some that believe it religiously, but there's a large faction of people in Iran that still do this, women, because they see it as a protest against U.S. influence. Not because of religion. There's a whole dynamic there. But of course, they just misrepresent it as if we're trying to liberate them when all you want to do is steal them and put them in a worse position, steal from them. But Jeannie points out they're the same lot that think Lebanese women don't wear bikinis. And we just made this point. Rania pointed this out. And she was like, I was just there last week and they were wearing skimpier things than Miami. And you've got this majorly influenced, supposedly a Lebanon expert who is telling you that they're suppressive and they can't even wear bikinis anymore. I mean, either he's knowingly lying as a dishonest person, or he's, as an expert, that's stupidly informed or uninformed. And what he's an expert in is propaganda around Lebanon or propaganda around Iran, which is what Roberts made the point about many, many times. But these are the people they try out on corporate media, both left and right. Now, he also, as a response to this, Nesta says, sure, they can, and this is actually pretty funny. So 70% of women are Iran science and engineering graduates, women. And this guy says, sure, they can be engineers, scientists, and many other well-respected positions in society, but do they have freedom to open an OnlyFans like truly empowered women? Now, obviously, I think it's clear that he's joking, but what's funny, as Adam says, I wish this was satire. The point is that in the world we're in right now, it's kind of scary that may actually be real. Like, I'm pretty sure he's joking. That's the sense I get. But that's the point, is that maybe he's not. This is something that people would actually say today, which is crazy. But some people would see it that way. Sad. Now, let's talk about Gaza. Some other points on this that I want to make sure you see before we finish with the conversation of North Carolina. Now, as Dan Cohen points out, or let's just start with Dr. Fidel Naim, Elon Musk just censored this. Twitter removed this post, not this one, but the one these were originally shared on. But we will not be silenced. Enough with the killing. Don't add to our suffering by silencing our voices. A terrible night in Gaza. This is being posted on the 2nd. After an airstrike hits schools. Now, you see, this is the point. While many people are now focusing on Lebanon. They're still indiscriminately murdering children in schools in Gaza. An airstrike hit the Al-Amal Center for Orphans, guys. The Al-Amal Center for Orphans. There were thousands of displaced people from Gaza City and northern Gaza that took shelter there. Dozens of injured women, children, and elderly arrived at this location and of the Al-Shifa hospitals. Here is just a few of the images of the dead children that were there as a result of what they did. Not much coverage of this because people are focusing on the larger discussion. But Twitter removed this post. Can you think of any reason why that might be the case? And as Dan Cohen points out, while Elon Musk and his legions of sycophants portray him as the savior of free speech, he straight up censors evidence of Israel's genocide in Gaza. I don't need to convince any of you that are actually paying attention. It happens every day. Now, Miss Palestinia points out that these are children who were living in the tents before Israeli airstrikes burned them to the ground in Rafah. They don't know which children are still alive from this video, but logically, most of them are probably dead based on what's going on. Missing, for sure. Most of them dead. Here's what we're seeing. It's a real photograph. This photo needs to be the front page of every newspaper in the world, Mohammed Safa points out. 20 tents full of displaced families burned alive in Gaza. I just really want this to sink in. This is what they're attacking. Are we to believe that there's rockets under those tents? Are there tunnel constructs? I mean, what was the story here, Israel? Oh, that's right. There wasn't one because nobody's asking questions anymore. They're just bombing entire tent cities, where they drove them to. You realize the reason those are tent areas is because that's where they told them to go to be safe. And then they bombed them and burned them in their tents in the middle of the night, mind you, because that's what it is. Is that what a democracy does? The only democracy in the Middle East? Most moral army in the world? It's like it hurts me to even say that. Puts a bad taste in my mouth. Are these people undeserving of life? These children? Asal Rod points out, this is what genocide looks like. In 1 year, 902 families, almost 1,000 families have been wiped off the civil registry. According to Gaza's government media office, which added that 1,364 cases, one family member survived. 902 entire families. Now, I'll show you Robert's tweet in a minute about the over 100 members of his extended family who have been killed in Gaza. Now, for all those that will immediately jump to the expected response of, we can't trust the Gaza. Well, your government already told us we could. Here's Vice News. Israeli intelligence, so your intelligence apparatus, has deemed the Hamas-run health ministry's death toll figures generally accurate. So when the Elon Levies of the world screech about how you shouldn't trust them, well, then you're telling me that your own government's lying to you? Or us? Probably. Probably actually the case. But the point is that you can't pretend that we shouldn't be trusting it because that's what we all know when your own government, both the intelligence and the army, made the case that this case was accurate. The army itself has found that they are reliable. Many, many, many times over the years, this has been shown. And even though they know that, even though the media knows that, you still get these same arguments from the people like Levy and Mazig and David Collier and these absolute morons out there that will just lie to you because Zionism. That's why this is important, because they're going to try to pretend this isn't the case. GazaHealthCenter.org. Probable evidence that the human toll in Gaza is already greater than 118,908 civilians. This letter was signed by 99 U.S. medical professionals. 99, not Palestinian doctors, not unremembers, U.S. medical professionals. Directly signed and addressed to Joe Biden. We are 99 American physicians, surgeons, nurses, midwives who have volunteered in Gaza. And they're straight up telling you that at this point, based on the estimations, and I guarantee this overlaps with the Lancet investigation and so on, it is likely that the death toll is greater than 118,000 people. That's almost 5.5% of Gaza's population. But it'll be ignored by the same people pretending they care about human life. Now realize this is not even just Gaza. And it's not even just the West. Like, realize the West Bank also spun out after this, which was part of what Lebanon was. And Robert made this case. He predicted this exact thing would happen because they failed in Gaza. It was embarrassing for them. And so they stepped into West Bank and just murdered a bunch of people. And guess what? They framed that as a win to their people. Look at what we did. They can't stop us in the West Bank. Think about how weak that makes them. But not only did they just invade the West Bank and march through like stormtroopers and burn houses down and rape and pillage, they are carrying out airstrikes. Airstrikes. You realize how crazy that is when you're talking about technically being part of Israel proper? That's Israel carrying out airstrikes on Israel. Now, I mean that in the sense of how they view it. All of this is Palestine. But this is not Gaza. This is the West Bank. There's not a Hamas presence there. That's provable by every account. That's not to say that there might not be associated overlaps, but there is not a Hamas presence in West Bank. And they are carrying out airstrikes in the Tulkarm area of northern occupied West Bank. 14 Palestinians killed. I think that's crazy. Think about that. That's like airstrikes carrying out in the town next to yours by your government because they claim that there are terrorists holed up in somebody's home. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. Now, this documentary came out in regard to specifically a lot of different points, but this one has to do with the idea of blocking aid. And I think it's important to hear this because these are people from the U.S. government that resigned in protest who know what's happening. As Rania writes, I hope it haunts everyone backing this horrifying genocide.
What you wrote in your resignation email?
I said that report will haunt us. And it does. And it haunts me. The determination that Israel is not blocking humanitarian assistance is patently, demonstrably false. Famine happens when assistance is blocked. It is the outcome of a deliberate decision.
In April, Stacey Gilbert was asked for her input on a Biden administration report on whether Israel was committing war crimes in Gaza.
I was shocked to see that it said in very clear terms, it is our determination that Israel is not blocking humanitarian assistance.
You had advised that that wasn't the case. Is that correct?
Yes. The subject matter experts were removed and the report was moved up to a higher level.
We just talked about this. Remember Matt Miller trying to act like you're just playing the game where the one you like is the expert? No, that's like I said before. There were the subject experts, and then there were politicians who have an interest in a political game against Iran. And so what they asked the experts, right? And they said they're blocking it. No, it wasn't they gave it to two different groups and both chimed in. They gave it to the experts. They said they're blocking it. Then they go, well, let's get a second opinion. Let's go to the people we know are going to give us a contract. It's the same with the fluoride game. We just talked about this, right? They are playing you. They know. They ask the experts. The report comes out. Yeah, fluoride's killing people. And they go, whoa, let's ask everybody else. Hold on, CDC, EPA, let's get everybody involved. And all the industry entities step in and go, time out. Even though that happened, we still now know that we forced it through. The NTP and FAN made sure we saw that, but they have been desperately trying to maintain it. It's the same thing here. They knew that they couldn't let that be the case because they don't care about American interests. They don't care about innocent life. They don't care about human rights. They care about supporting Israel blindly. So they went to anybody who would give them the answer they want, and then they forced this person who's actually being honest out of her position. That's what happens over time. Government drives out the people that care and fills it with people that will blindly follow. And then over the process of decades, we look back and go, well, it can't be everybody. Yeah, it can. It really can.
We were told you will see the report when it is released publicly.
And then the report comes out and just doesn't include what you had to say?
I wasn't sure I read that correctly. I read it again and I sent an email then that I would resign as a result of that.
Yep. I mean, think about how many times now, it's a very short period of time. Like just going back to COVID-19 illusion, FDA members, people, or how about this guy? This one I think is powerful every time, in whatever context.
We have to condemn the atrocities that happen every day to Palestinians in the West Bank. You mentioned sexual violence. I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Moscovia in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believe they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. We are looking at a situation where there is so much dehumanification, where people are not seen.
Right. He resigned from the State Department. And this is before October 7th. So let's not pretend like it was all because of October 7th that they ended up raping those people in prison. No, that's what Israeli government direction has caused. Period. And he tried to call it out, and they knew it, and instead they tried to cover it up. And guess what they used to cover it up? You're a terrorist. Yeah, because that's usually what happens. Or racist. One of their two go-tos. Quds News Network highlights that food supplies in Gaza have sharply declined as Israeli authorities implemented new custom rules for humanitarian aid and scaled back commercial deliveries. You see, people we're looking elsewhere. Not, as they're pretending it's not there, as Elon would tell you, Levy, more food than they've ever had, even though we know that's not the case. Well, now it's gotten even worse. So already famine, and here I'll include this, by the way, seeing as how this is important to have in front of you. The IPC itself, the expert in the field, telling you at this moment, famine is imminent for 1.1 million people in Gaza. Catastrophic food insecurity right now. And they lie about it. And many of them are calling it a hoax, Elon Levy included. It's a hoax. Imagine you calling something else a hoax like that. What would they do, right? The bottom line is that past that point, knowing this is where we are, they've made it even worse. They're actually taking action, making new rules to drive this into further famine. I mean, look, based on their current actions, we damn well know what they're trying to do. They want every single Palestinian gone. And here's what they're doing. They can act like it's their fault somehow. UN aid trucks from Jordan have been halted for 2 weeks, guys. 2 weeks, raising concerns about increasing malnutrition in Gaza. Commercial food shipments also dropped, with Gaza now receiving as few as 45 trucks a day. Remember, it starts with 500. Before October 7th, 500 a day, which included other than food, but 500 a day. And they were still food insecure. That was barely maintaining a food insecure position. 45 trucks a day. And realize, I mean, that's a guaranteed decline into death. Period. And before you start jumping to the narrative from Israel about how they shouldn't, the only reason they even need assistance is because they've never allowed them the right of return. They've forced them into refugee camps, removed them from their homes, and have kept them in these positions. And in Gaza, are not allowed to leave anywhere. And then make it their fault. Just straight up racism, guys. It's disgusting. Humanitarian workers warn that food insecurity is at its worst in recent weeks, impacting 2.3 million Gazans. That's the whole country, guys. That's all of them. Now, I'll include the ProPublica article, which, it's amazing how much evidence we have. And all we end up going with is what the politician said. Everything else shows you, but Blinken said, right? Israel deliberately blocks humanitarian aid. 2 government bodies concluded. But Matt Miller went with the expert, apparently. No, he went with the politician. Here is Avi Shalom, who I've played many times. Now, I don't know if this is a new one or not. It's at the kind of, was it the Oxford kind of, what is it called again? We've seen this setting more than once, where they have these little debates. I think it's Oxford. I could be wrong. But the point is, he's simply standing up and giving his side of the argument. But this is an Israeli academic, highly respected, who's spoken many times over the years about what Zionism really is. Maybe I'll play that next. But here he is talking about how he served in the IDF and what they actually do. Which, by the way, there is so many videos like this coming from people that were in this position.
He served in the IDF in the mid-1960s. The ultimate aim of all these policies to deny the Palestinians any independent existence in Palestine. Let me turn briefly to Hamas. Under international law, the Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation, and Hamas is the vanguard of this resistance.
Now, if you hear him flesh out his thoughts, he wouldn't tell you that I blindly support Hamas or that they're even good, but he's making a objective point. Whether or not you support them or think they're good people, it's still the law, and this still is the reality. Now, if they commit crimes, they're just still crimes. See how easy that is? But the problem is you get these emotional screaming arguments about how dare you? They're the worst terrorist group in the world. No, those are the people you're supporting. Those are the governments that you think you're side on. Period. Doesn't matter what you think about the groups. These are the groups that, I mean, let's see, going back to the election conversation. I still think Israel is completely involved with making that illusion happen. Either way, let's pretend it wasn't. They elected this group. You don't like them. You think they're terrorists, but then you go, no, we don't like that, so somebody else. Well, then you don't believe in democracy. And the bottom line is, what he's telling you is that they are the vanguard of that resistance. And that means they have the legal right to act against Israel, including and especially talking about the illegal kibbutz settlements that are used as a human shield between Israel's main areas and everybody else. But the point, legally, they have this right.
Under international law, the Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation, and Hamas is the vanguard of this resistance. Israel is a reactionary and racist colonial power which relies on brute military force to impose its apartheid regime on the Palestinians. Israel is the main obstacle to peace, and I reject this motion with some vehemence.
Zionism is racism. Israel cannot be both. Israel is either a racist Jewish state or it's a democratic state for everybody. And that's what I would like Israel to be. I'd like a democratic solution, one state with equal rights for all its inhabitants. Your organization, Human Rights Watch, issued a report last year about Israel, and the conclusion was it is an apartheid state. And there are 4 major human rights groups in the last 2 years who issued similar reports, reached the same conclusion. Israel is an apartheid state. So apartheid is racism. Apartheid is discrimination. But Israel is the only member of the United Nations that I know which is officially racist. And I say this because of the July 2018 nation-state law, which says the Jews have a unique right to self-determination in Israel. Unique means exclusive. Yes. It means Arabs have no right to self-determination. It means even if Arabs became a majority, they would still have no right to self-determination. So most certainly Zionism is a racist ideology, and it is largely responsible for the Nakba that has unfolded throughout the last century and continues today.
And of course, as you can see, I grabbed for you I don't know what the 4th one is. There's more than 4, by the way, but I don't know what the 4th major one he is talking about. If you know, let me know. But these are the 3 main highly regarded human rights groups in the world. Human Rights Watch, 2021, apartheid state. Undeniably. He was right there. He was speaking with Human Rights Watch. Amnesty International, Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, 2022. And then, of course, I think the most important, B'Tselem, a leading Israeli human rights group, not a Palestinian, an Israeli human rights group. This is apartheid, a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid, which, as you just heard him discuss, this Israeli academic, it is the worst example of racism that we know of. On top of that, the nation-state law he points to is important to remember as well. This is from 2019. Very real. The law exists. And the point was that I always make this case. A TV star who either doesn't know and is blinded by the narrative or is lying for Israel stood up and said Arabs are equal citizens. So this narrative you keep hearing of people saying that on Twitter, Ben Shapiro, the rest of the liars. Well, guess what? The TV star said that publicly. Netanyahu himself stood up and corrected it. Not stood up, but responded and says Israel, this is a quote, is the nation state of the Jews alone. That was his response to the claim that Arabs are equal. And yet here we have all the people in the world telling us that you're such a racist liar. They're either really stupid and uninformed or they're a dishonest person. It's right in front of you. A lot of this is like that. Now, this is, what was this from TRT World? The U.S. is responsible for 37 out of 41 vetoes where the United Nations Security Council has tried to hold Israel accountable for their crimes. Guys, this goes back a long way. But in fact, I thought it was more than that. But in any case, a lot of times they've tried to hold them accountable for crimes that the world can see. And every time they stand up and say, no, we won't allow that. Not because they're upholding, the claim is always they're racist or there's some kind of a bias. Well, if the law is biased, well then, you could argue in many cases it could be applied. The application of a law arguably would not be. You could always make a case. The point is, in this case, the law is what they're breaking. They're killing children, using human shields, occupying territory, and they just go, you're racist. End of story. Which, by the way, is what we get today. Oh, you're starving children to death. You must hate Jews. That should sound stupid, because it is. Here is a documentary from Al Jazeera. And this is a hour, 20-minute long documentary, which I highly recommend you check out, that shows you exactly what's going on. And there's a few of these coming out right now. There's one around health. There's one about the starvation. I think there's actually two from Al Jazeera. Either way, they're breaking down just untold amounts of war crimes that publicly pointed out. They're praising them. They're laughing about them. They're having little streams about how they're killing children. It's the worst thing you've ever had to watch. Now, compare this to a fake snuff film made up a bunch of provable lies that Israel still circulates. Very different than some bloody room that you lie about and find out you later fabricated, or actual explicit videos taken by IDF members laughing about how they just murdered children. Bit different, isn't it? Robert Inlakesh says this, this is today. I'm accused of pro-Palestine bias as a journalist. To be clear, when you see kids shot in front of you, which he has, when close friends are blown to pieces with their children, which they have been, when you lose 100 plus extended family members and colleagues, which he has, you can't be objective, in quotes, but you can tell the truth. There's few people I have more respect for than Robert Inlakesh. And imagine being in this position. You read his work. Imagine what it takes to remain unemotional, objective, which he is in this position. And he makes a good point. This is the point. We all have our biases. We all do. And clearly, you can see why he has a reason to hate, to be outraged, and yet he still finds a way to keep himself objective and straightforward with what he reports. And clearly, in many cases, read his work, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Can you imagine that? 100 members. Now, this is extended family, right? It's not just immediate, but that's part of his family, his wife's family, and the greater extended family. 100 plus people in Gaza. That's like these 902 families that are being wiped off the map. Not Hamas members, just his family. Personal. Jonathan Cook makes a good point to end this segment. He says, you decide. And hopefully we've got some people out there that have been paying attention to the show today that maybe disagree with us. If you're being objective, you tell me how you decide. He says, I've been saying for 25 years I've lived in and studied Israel that it is a highly militarized, ethno-nationalist apartheid state. But that basically every human rights group just told us that, but he's saying that's his belief. Driven by an ugly Jewish supremacism that aggressively craves, this word we just looked at the other day, the Lebensraum, it's sort of like the defining nation. It says the territory that the state or nation believes is needed for its natural development. It comes from the Nazi German mindset. And it says, and cannot make peace with its neighbors. Actually, make sure that was it's specifically associated with Nazi Germany. So he sees it as a militarized, ethno-nationalist apartheid state driven by supremacism, aggressively seeking other people's territory that cannot make peace with its neighbors. He says Western politicians and pundits have been telling you over the same period that Israel is a normal, liberal, democratic state where the rule of law applies and anyone who disagrees is almost certainly an anti-Semite. Which account of Israel better accords with what you have seen of Israel's behavior over the past year, over the past month, yesterday? You tell me, when you stand back and are being real with yourself, which one of those lines up with what you're seeing? You guys can decide. I think it's pretty clear. Now, Israel also just bombed, and what seems to be a pretty large escalation, but at least it's being framed that way, and it is. But I argue it's not as much because this has been going on a long time. Anybody that's actually been paying attention, Israel's been bombing Syria, and in some cases, pretty much Russian territory or bases, or at least tangential, or close enough to where it should matter for a long time now. Now, this one's a little bit more specific, but I just think it's important to point out that Russia could let this fly over and not respond, just like they have many times already. Because whether it's, again, never take this as good guy, bad guy, because that's just a childish binary view of things. But the reality being is that Russia has many times since they've been bombing Syria, both the U.S. and Israel, has shown restraint in times where the U.S. and Israel would have never. Just important to think about. And it says Israel apparently just destroyed an ammo depot owned by Russia in Syria. When is Russia going to wake up? This is Casey Wright saying this. He ought to watch Nasrallah's final speech because the last line is relevant. But he said, this is Middle East Observer. Sham, the foreign minister, firefighting teams headed to one of the sites surrounding the Jableh area after columns of smoke rising from it. This is basically a Russian base that they have bombed. That's the general reporting we're getting. Now, this is late yesterday into today. Russian defenses have begun to support Syrian air defenses, which again has been kind of going on for a long time now. So I think this is going to get a little bit more, like, let's put it this way. If Russia needed an excuse to drive this harder, knowing that they're already supporting, again, at least ostensibly, the Palestinian plight or the Syrian plight that then extends to Palestine, however you want to look at it, this may be the move that will, I mean, everything Israel's doing is shooting itself in the foot, but this could be more of a blowback than they expect. Now, here's what Wilkerson had to say about this, and I find it interesting.
In almost every category, I don't want to even get into the domestic issues, but in terms of international relations, foreign policy, security policy, this is the most damaging, Cretan-like group of people I have ever encountered in my life in this country. Tony Blinken leads the list. Joe Biden is right there with him. Jake Sullivan is right there. Lloyd Austin has resurrected himself a bit because of what I've heard in the background about him trying to bring the hammer down on people, including Bibi himself. He was totally ignored. But that's the only sign of sanity and sobriety in this administration. And we're just doing, along with Ukraine, we are doing irreparable damage to ourselves. Last night, I picked up a communication that Israel had launched a strike against Tartus, the Russian base in Syria. I've yet to confirm it with sources that I respect, including our own here, but I wouldn't be surprised. They're attacking the Russian base, and they got fired at by S-300 and S-400 missiles. I don't know if they brought some vaunted Israeli aircraft down, but they may have. I also know that we have been dislodged to a certain extent from our little fiefdom in Syria. We are in Syria illegally. Bashar al-Assad is the leader of Syria. He has not asked us to be where we are. We are not fighting ISIS. We are protecting oil wells that were at least pumping oil to Israel. I'm told with the help of Russia, we've been pushed off that particular installation.
So here's important that as he's claiming, the oil they've been stealing from Syria for a long time now is being used in Israel. Surprise, surprise. So it's just the extension of their terrorist network, right? Their criminal organization network where they're just occupying countries, stealing resources and pumping it into the new genocide. Pretty obvious. But let's realize, as you know, Russia is clearly playing an interesting role in this. There's obvious influence from Israel in Russia, like there is everywhere. So consider that fact. But the obvious point is that we've seen a lot of different responses from Russia overlapping with Syria. I don't think it's as simple as simply saying it is, even in the United States. I mean, realize that obvious influence there more than anywhere in the world, which is easy to see. But nonetheless, there are still things that seem to go against their interests in some cases. It's never as simple as just going, everybody's controlled by X, Y, and Z, right? But nonetheless, it's all showing you the criminality. Well, on top of the overall, Russia has been showing the support for Syria. Syria wouldn't be there right now if they weren't. So even that seems to aggressively contradict with what Israel's intentions were for Syria, at least as we can see. And the point is what they claimed, not what I'm pretending they want, but they themselves have expressed in other conversations. And I'm talking about the leadership, the rulership.
Slight bit. And so we might not be protecting those oil wells anymore. But we're involved in the largest oil smuggling operation in the world in Syria, if we're still doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a comedy of errors that is nonetheless not comedy at all. It's bloody. It's filled, as Lloyd Austin said, with civilian casualties. Lebanon has added to that toll immeasurably. We now are building a civilian casualty toll in Lebanon as well as Gaza and on the West Bank. And we're associated with it. Oh, we're not just associated. We are the enabler.
They are. We are not the government. The government is doing this.
Most of those things that they're taking into Lebanon, the artillery rounds, the 155 artillery pieces, the MLRS and such, all are things that we either provided them the funds to buy or we gave to them. So we're as much invading Lebanon as is.
Yeah, the government is. Your governments who are acting in your interests. Now, as somebody mentioned in the chat, by the way, and I had this pulled off, but wasn't able to flesh it out entirely. I saw it last before going into the show. The reports are saying that Ukrainian attacks have hit towards a Russian power installation, a nuclear power discussion. But ultimately, I haven't seen it fleshed out, so we'll be looking at it going forward. But the point is, let's not forget who is influencing and arming and funding and driving action through the Azov movement, the U.S. government in Israel. I think right now the desperation of Israel's needs is being shown in every string that it has. Everything it can pull, it is pulling. And you're seeing it. That's why we just went over every single U.S. politician left and right coming out yesterday going, I pray for Israel. Well, you can prove objectively they are committing more crimes, more war crimes than anybody in a short period of time we've ever seen. More children death toll, more civilian bombings, more targeted attacks, more human shields use, more illegal munitions. I mean, it's just incredible, which has to show you how bad of a position we're in as Americans. Every single one of them came out and said, yeah, we're blind support, unconditional, during the most obvious and most documented genocide we've ever seen. We are in a bad position as Americans. We have to see that. As the Savior points out, here's Ukraine. Can we bomb Russian air bases? The U.S., no, it can lead to escalation. Israel, we bombed the Russian air base. It's just, the point is there's no consistency. It's Israel does whatever it wants, and the U.S. toes the line. Now, we're going to talk more about this as we go forward. Obviously, I mean, right now they're bombing in Lebanon. That is happening. And they're bombing in Gaza. They're bombing Syria. They're bombing Yemen. All of these countries are actively fighting to free countries from occupation. Doesn't mean good guy, bad guy, but that is the objective reality. Now, just because you see them as terrorists because the group trying to occupy them tells you that, maybe you should ask whether they might have an ulterior motive, just as a thought. But whatever the overarching point that you think is most important, there is law in action here. And if you think that ultimately they can just ignore that law because they've told you the people over there are bad, again, I think this is a childish mentality that allows you to ignore criminality because you've chosen a side. And if that's not the two-party illusion in real time, I don't know what else is. But make sure you pay attention to what they're actually doing, not what they're telling you they're doing. What they're currently doing is bombing civilians by every account other than the U.S. and Israel and people blindly supporting what they're doing. I mean that. Look around. It's important to see this. And we need to do whatever we can to stop this from continuing to escalate. Now, in other news, from a local perspective, from an American perspective, I thought it was important to discuss this story because it is a important, what's the right word for it? In the partisan conversation, it has sort of overtaken the conversation. And that always is interesting to see. So I wanted to start with the last show we just did. Major dioxin risk in Georgia, which I argue is a very big deal, which is getting very little coverage overall, even though it has now seemingly dissipated. It was days of nonstop chlorine and other unknown chemicals they won't tell you burning. That is a maximized dioxin problem. Chlorine is the pinnacle reason that these dioxins are formed. So hopefully we're not going to, Georgia and the surrounding areas need, I think was it Covers or I forget the name of that one, the main location. But generally the areas in the surrounding states, based on East Palestine and how we know this stuff drifts along the air, as we are now being told it went states across after East Palestine, which, by the way, is what we were telling you right at the beginning. They lied about. We need to ask whether we need to make sure we get independent testing, find out what actually happened, what the actual reports are showing from dioxin release, and hold these people accountable. And the media, the local government, for asking why they're not doing their jobs, why they're not testing for dioxins, why they're not telling you what was there. But we also talked about the overlap, and there was a Ohio example as well, coming back from East Palestine, by the way. But I wanted to just point this out so you make sure you don't miss that important story, and overlap that with 2 points before we go on more to the point from North Carolina. This is from yesterday. Haze, chlorine smell from chemical plant fire could be noticeable in Atlanta. So just like I told you before, if people were feeling ill or smelling this or seeing drifting ash fall all the way across state lines, that's dioxin. That means that's how far that went. And I want to make sure people understand this. Look at the last show we just did. The fact that this is a chlorine, one of the largest things they were producing was chlorine. And the amount of smoke and the red colored smoke, that means that they're burning particulates and then a massive chlorine combustion. That is guaranteed, in my opinion, based on the science we looked over, to cause a massively larger dioxin release than what we saw with vinyl chloride in East Palestine. But I guarantee there are experts out there that know more than me in this topic. Where are they? This should be discussed. I'm hoping somebody like Scott C. Smith or somebody actually goes and starts testing there, because I think it's a problem. But my point is to show you this and kind of dovetail this with the conversation in Hurricane Helene. Because here's what I'm hearing in Tennessee. Tennessee Environmental Department, this is as of this morning or late yesterday, warns people to temporarily avoid all bodies of water affected by extreme flooding. Now, obviously, the first point is that during this flooding, there's always, sewage and different problems, which I don't even know why. I mean, in some cases, you can see why that, the drains and the ground and so on. You think it'd be better protected than that or sealed off. But the point is, you can have that happen. When flooding happens and you worry about sewage and, disease and whatever else. But I found this interestingly overlapped. So at the same time, when just a few states over, you have this happening, all of a sudden they're going, don't drink any bodies of water. I don't know. I found that interesting. Now, it could just be that it's simultaneously happening, but I wanted to make sure we saw that. So, but this brings us over into the idea of the hurricane and the larger conversation of what might be going on. So what we're going to get into here to finish up, and it shouldn't really take all that long, but I want to go through this and show you what I found and what my perspectives are, and explicitly state out of the gate from this segment. It's important that we question everything. Do not dismiss the possibility of weather modification. Do not dismiss the possibility that there may be some kind of a surreptitious agenda from the local government or some other corporation. I mean, guys, this is literally the plot of every damn movie. It's literally what we've seen happen over and over and over through our history. And you know what the usual kind of the common thread is, that they lie about it until they're caught and then give you a narrative and try to lessen the damage every time. Or in the interest of, or the example of Norfolk Southern, lie about it, get caught, and nothing happens, which is what happened. But my point saying all that is that it's important that even though things seem like they may be crazy, things that we now know, like during the COVID-19 illusion or even geoengineering itself, these are obviously real. They've admitted these things. But 1 second ago, it was crazy, lunatic conspiracy theory. So just don't dismiss anything. But at the same time, that applies to the other side of the coin. Question everything, including things that might be coming from people you trust, including from people that are trying to tell you that there's more going on, but yet not giving you any facts to back it up. Or, I'm not even saying I have an example in my mind. I'm just saying every time we see these large conversations that is overrun with people dumping in BS, making up narratives to get you clicking or to get you, how about more specifically, that everything that we're highlighting is real, but then you get people with other agendas trying to muddy the waters with nonsense to make you miss the real part of it. Like, for example, with Lahaina, there was a very real overlap with the Directed Energy Directorate, but as far as my research showed, that we were never able to definitively prove that, because honestly, we didn't even really need to, because the criminality was so extreme just with what happened that we could prove, but guess what? Nobody was held accountable. Because these bombastic morons out there were driving you into conversations that had no basis in reality. They were making you miss the forest for the trees. But here's the thought would be that maybe they were using direct energy weapons, which are very real. And because of all those bombastic morons, that got missed. Because instead of highlighting the provable location and what they might have actually done, scientifically sound, you end up with blue things and lasers and dumb stories that I can prove to you were false, that make you miss the real story. So all that's to say, let's go through this with an objective mind holding on to what we can prove and asking every question. So here is XVN saying breaking, and this is highlighting a Fox News report. Nearly 200 people have been confirmed dead. This is as of today. Now, my point is what Fox News is doing here is what I kind of find gross. Just the kind of just constant coverage of just people suffering, which there is a news value to just going, look at what's happening in North Carolina. And the fact that it's ongoing, yeah, the daily report, here's what happened. But what we keep seeing from corporate media is we know going back a long way, big storm events get views. So they hype it. They hype it like it's some kind of an investigation when it's just a storm. But see, the point is that if we can prove government malfeasance, level 1, then that absolutely matters. But they rarely go into that. If we can prove that there's some kind of technological manipulation going on with the weather, then my God, that's a huge story. But we should prove or have something to go on other than there is an agenda to take the land, therefore this must have been what happened, which is not what I think. I'll go into all this for you. But what they're doing from the corporate media perspective is sort of like just, like NFL coverage of the ongoing weather story. And it bothers me. But let me play this first just so you can hear what they're reporting. This is as of yesterday into today.
Now we can tell you that the number has just jumped. The confirmed dead, at least 200 people. We are just beginning to see some new and more heartbreaking images of the storm's intensity. Nearly 1 million people remain without utilities, no electricity, no running water in certain areas across 4 states.
Yeah, that's crazy. Now, it's not to say that there may be some logical reason why they can't or whatever you want to fit in right there, but it shouldn't really matter, right? The idea that people have been left in this position while your government is dumping billions of dollars in foreign countries, it obviously doesn't sit right for most people, left or right. And I think that's a problem for them right now, that we can all recognize that you are not the primary objective for your government, if ever, by the way. Now, let's not forget, going back to Hurricane, was it Harvey, I think, where they were literally forcing people to sign documents that made them pledge an oath to Israel before they got aid from your government. Very real story. And that happens all the time. They've signed anti-BDS pledges. I mean, your government constantly acts in the interest of foreign countries at your expense. But so to think about that, keeping it in mind, let's go through, objectively what we're seeing. Because one of the narratives we're seeing is that this was, that the government is, choosing not to help, which may be the case, which I don't think I think it's just, they just don't care. But it's building towards the idea, which gets into the lithium conversation, which is real, that this might be done to take this land. But it's interesting because there's a real interest there in what corporations and even the government might be wanting, but it doesn't seem to line up with what's actually happening. That there is already something going forward, but I'll make a point about how it could be that they just don't like that it might take longer than they want, and that maybe this could have been taken advantage of. Or you could argue they created a hurricane to do that, which, again, all of this becomes really abstract, while certainly possible. The evidence to back that up altogether does not seem to be there. But land grab, 100%, that seems like a possibility. Or the idea that this was, like in that case, like Lahaina, you could argue whether or not the other part of the story was there. Every single time you have an event like this, there's things that happen. You find corporations that try to take advantage of land that they want every single time, right? Every single time there's an emergency, you have other people trying to take advantage of that emergency for their benefit. You have government actions trying to take advantage of the situation to benefit their own political standing or to line their own pockets at your expense. I mean, this is every time. Or, for example, every time we have an emergency like this, hurricane or otherwise, you have the same things that happen, which I don't agree with. And I'll point this out as we go forward. You have the government saying, you can't come in and help people, right? You can't come in and help people. That's our job. You can't donate unless it's through certain channels. All of that should bother you, but it's not unique to right now, which is kind of how it's being framed. So let's start with Billy Bowling saying, I understand the frustration with slow responses for these tiny Appalachian towns. This is a main thoroughfare connecting Damascus, Virginia to 5 other towns and the North Carolina line. He says, it's just gone. Every route is like this in some way. So first, what he's highlighting for you is that, and this is not to say excuse for the government, not even remotely, because that's why I hope I just outlined, but nonetheless, you can see why there may be a genuine reason why people are unable to. Now, that again, to point out, there's helicopters, there's plenty of other ways that they could, as the government, if they really were able to, let's just take the billions upon billions upon billions of dollars going to Israel and Ukraine and just said, no, we're going to use that immediately to help you instead. Obviously, there wouldn't be a problem. With that much money, you can do whatever you want. But what he's highlighting is that the roads, this main central road here that will take you through, which is where they would be used to get a lot of this there, is basically inoperable. So just keep that in mind. That does play a factor. And it's right there. Look at that. It's crazy. And there's a lot of these. Just kind of jump through it real quick. He goes along this road with a drone. I mean, look, that's gone. That road doesn't exist, guys. And apparently, as he's saying, it's a main connection through multiple 5 locations. And this person says, is that Highway 91 still closed as well? And he goes, 91 is open to mountain, but it's really bad in spots. You better bring your patience. Just showing you the images right here. Okay, so that being said, there's clear damage on these roads, which might hinder any kind of a process. Just keep that objective fact in mind. Ryan Tier points this out, which I found interesting. Now, this is his experience, but from other examples. He says, if you're wondering why citizens are being turned away that are coming to help, which they are, which is disgusting, outrageous, but not unique to this event. He said that's both Tennessee and North Carolina. He says, you'll want to hear my experience as someone who has been doing this as a private citizen for almost a decade. He says, I was able to get into and out of Asheville. We brought food, water, fuel, and other supplies, as well as help people affected by the floods. But there are reasons why they are not allowing outside help. He says, I cannot confirm the reasons why North Carolina, even though he's saying that he has gone in and out. He's saying, but I can tell you the reasons in other storms he's worked at or worked in, where they are helping people. He says, let me share with you the first disaster area that I finally realized that this was all about money. So level 1, guys, because we'll get into the idea of the other things we talked about, but just level 1, money, government, just corruption. Whether local government, whether corporation corruption, whether individual people trying to hawk things for higher prices, there's always people taking advantage. And that doesn't always tie back to some larger conspiracy. But what he's saying is that his experience, he's realized that all of it is ultimately about money, which I think we know. He says in the Florida Keys with Hurricane Irma, after Texas got hit with Harvey, we finished our efforts in Texas and were the first citizen team to make it to Key Largo. He says the federal agencies had US 1 shut down just south of Key Largo and wouldn't let anyone in or out, even though the road was okay to pass. Now that, to me, that seems strange. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you stop people from coming in? Now, of course, I think their argument, which I don't really think makes sense, is liability. But that's not enough for me. As somebody was saying in one of these comments before I went live, you don't need the government's permission to help people. I don't care what they say. I don't care what bureaucratic nonsense they throw at you. You do not need somebody's permission to be a human being and help somebody in need. But that's what they do. It's kind of like the lie they say you're not allowed to give food left over at restaurants because liability. That's actually a false claim. There's been plenty of legislation, federal and local in many places, that say that doesn't apply. Then they just do it. They just dump it in trash anyway and pour bleach over it because they're bad people. But at the end of the day, it's the same dynamic, right? I don't care if you claim it's like, you could go in and get hurt. Well, I'm a free person. I don't need your allowance to risk my life. I ultimately don't think that's what it's about. You can decide what the alternative could be. But it says, we explained to them that we had boats, jet skis, food, water, chainsaws, and fuel to bring to people who at the moment were desperately in need of all of those things and were not having those needs met by the government. That happens every time. Harvey was a great example of that. They didn't care, wouldn't let us in. Now we're seeing that right now. Now, of course, that's in and of itself, that should be a big deal. And we should highlight that. We should seek to change it. But of course, you get a lot of the partisan players who are connecting the dot with that to some bigger narrative. And the problem is, even if it may be, you miss the immediacy of the point. That is a problem. That should be enough for people to be upset. But when you try to lurch it into something else that maybe you don't have all the evidence for, we fail to highlight this point. We don't have accountability for the immediacy of this point. And it says, it was night by that point, and you rarely saw the lights of vehicles in the distance on the individual keys, meaning the emergency response teams from FEMA weren't even working. It was all quiet. He says, we decided that we would go anyways. We filled up the boats and jet skis with all that we could reasonably carry. We went by water around their BS blockade and around their law enforcement presence on the water. Doesn't that sound like Lahaina? Right? Like it's just weirdly like just militarized block down of, yeah, that's very strange. It was 87 miles by water to get our first stop. It says, when we arrived there, we were greeted by a homeowner. He says, for privacy, won't give a name, though we have video, who was elated to see us and all the supplies we brought. His house was in shambles. We started offloading supplies on the shoreline and helping to get them into what was left of his house. During that process, he explained to us that FEMA had set up a command center at a local high school on the island, but that they weren't doing anything to help the residents, not even bringing water. Now, what's also important, I should note, look, it's easy to want to believe everybody who has everything to say all the time. Well, that sounded confusing. Just anybody who wants to speak up, it's easy to want to take them at face value because you don't want to believe they would lie when it's going on. And that's not most likely. I would say they probably don't. But obviously, being objective, somebody could easily, especially in the world today, everything is partisan right now. Everything, especially when it becomes partisan, when all of a sudden you got this weird partisan focus. Well, then you got people in that town that go, well, hey, maybe I could say this. Maybe I'll get on their show, or maybe I can say this and it'll help the agenda because I believe it's true. So I'll lie about it for my truth. If you don't think that's possibly happening in any discussion, you're lying to yourself. You know it's happening in every discussion. Now, that aside, though, my point is that maybe let's just take this example. So it's not about North Carolina. This person in Florida, maybe everybody else got helped and they ran out and they get to help them, right? But yet he reports to this guy, they're not even helping. I didn't get anything. See, I'm just trying to be objective here. The point is, how there could be, it's easy to kind of see what you want. All I'm stressing is objectivity and caution, because I'm telling you guys, there's a lot of people out there. I'm not going to name any names of people that I've talked about in the past who are always the one that sticks their head up in these stories. One of the ones I pointed out in Lahaina, who got literally called out by the supporters who said, we gave you all this money and now you're staying in a 5-star hotel. Yeah, and confronted live on TV, live on their stream. They said, you didn't even show up. You didn't even tell us you were here. You promised, blah, blah, blah. The point is, these people tend to pop up in these situations. Lots of backing funding, even though they take donations. And I think that these people have a tendency to lean into whatever is the most bombastic story, whatever becomes the most contentious, even if it's not accurately backed up by the facts. That's the mainstream alternative media for you. But it goes on to say, instead, he explained, now again, I would argue the reality is probably that they probably weren't helping, because I actually think that's more likely what's going on, because I don't think FEMA or your government cares. But objectively, you can see what I said there does make sense and is probably in some cases happening. But it goes, instead, we explained that we were driving around using a loudspeaker, telling people to stay in their homes. They weren't even helping the homeowners with supplies. Or he explained that's what they were doing. Just stay in your homes, and weren't giving them anything. He says, I was skeptical at first when he was telling me all of this, but then he said something that broke my heart. He told us that the people of the Keys were all in despair because they had just seen weeks before the overwhelming support for Texas with Hurricane Harvey, but by the citizens of this country. He and his neighbors on all of the Keys, the islands, felt like Americans had forgotten about them completely, because at this point, 5 days after landfall, all they had seen was FEMA, and they were of no help, at least from his perspective. The residents were cut off from the outside world. Again, very familiar, right? This is one of the things we're hearing now. Why are they cutting off communication? Why haven't they given them any way to communicate? Again, it very well could be some very serious conspiracy. But I want you to recognize that this is a kind of not a unique dynamic. So that could very well mean that every time there's something weird happening. But I just want to make sure we're being objective about this. It's saying, excuse me, cut off, no cellular, no internet, no way to contact anyone. Now, this could very well just be because the local government, I'm willing to bet you, even considering another larger part of the story, that the local governments probably have some kind of an internal dynamic where they go, look, we need to cut them off because we don't want this to happen. We don't want them screaming about how we're failing or how we don't meet their needs. If that's what government does, guys, and I guarantee you, they put them above your interest every day of the week. It says the only communication they had, and this is still Florida, was from a local radio station on the Sugarloaf Key that was broadcasting on AM to the surrounding keys. The man, after hearing that there were citizens trying to bring them help, but being refused entry by federal law enforcement, was visibly upset. He and his neighbors really thought the country had abandoned them. He insisted that we get into his waterlogged truck and that we would take us to that radio station so that we could go live on the air to tell the citizens trapped in the Keys that we, the American people, were there to help and that the government was trying to stop our efforts. And this is exactly what we did. After that, we were determined to help as many people as we could, but we were met with red tape throughout the whole process. And the process and time we were in the Keys, which again, That doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It could just be government. I mean, in and of itself, that should drive us crazy. But my point is that should be a problem, aside, even if there is a bigger split, that we first recognize the bureaucracy, the interest. What that really shows you is their personal interest, and their liability is more important than your safety, than your needs, right? We got to make sure we're not accountable first. We got to make sure we don't get sued first. Really? For some level you understand, because they could get sued. But my point is, if your interest is helping people, then you shouldn't be blocking anybody else. Let the guy come through with his truck. You get the point. And this is the same thing we see every time, and it's frustrating. He says, we finally were able to talk to some authorities that led us down to the certain areas towards the end of the certain boot key. This was the same hotel where state and local authorities were staging their personnel, and they were happy to see us, apparently. He says, I was able to coordinate several trucks full of supplies to be brought down to a certain area. I'm just trying to rush through an EOC marathon. It says, I was privy to the EOC meeting, but was informed in that meeting that all of the semi-trucks full of food, water, hygiene supplies were to be turned around and not allowed to be offloaded. The reason they gave us was that these donations, and this is also happening today, guys, were not from companies on their preferred vendors list, which is just the cherry on top of the outrage pie here, guys. That's incredible. So not only are you stopping people who have something that could be helping for your own safety, your own liability, you're literally stopping anything coming through, even if it's handed to you, if it's not on the certain list. Now, you can read so many things into that. I won't try to jump into, you guys can, just that alone should be outrageous. But there's plenty of things you could try to find to connect to that. Plenty of reasons why they might do that. But your government is using, what would you call that? They're more interested in making sure their corporate allies are getting the benefit than you maybe surviving. And it says, and that they would not accept them or give them to the residents of the keys impacted by the storm. He said, it was all at that point I realized it's all about money. They're literally profiting, if not a lot more, off of your suffering. It says these preferred vendors, in quotes, are getting part of the money being released by the state. And that's the disaster stuff. That's the emergency released. When they declare an emergency or disaster, it opens the doors, the floodgates to this. All the things we saw during the COVID-19 illusion, circumventing laws or just ignoring them like usual, funding that gets used, like the CARES Act dynamic. It went to exactly like we told you it would. Major corporations, most of which didn't have any concern about you, despite Trump screaming how it was all about small business. No, not even remotely. It says, in turn, some of these vendors make it on the list because of a friend that gets them on the list. And in return for getting ridiculously outlandish amounts of compensation for the services they render, they also get kickbacks. So accepting outside donations, even though they are on location and can help people now, they would rather let people suffer so they can get their kickbacks. This meeting solidified his resolve, he says, to help these people, regardless of what the greedy officials wanted. See my point? This in and of itself could be exactly what's happening. Don't dismiss other things, but realize that this in and of itself is something worthy of news coverage. I diverted all semi-trucks, he says, to the Faro Blanco Resort, filled the first floor with pallets upon pallets of food, water, and essential supplies, and created a food pantry for residents to come and get anything and however much they needed. From local state troopers to the homeless, were all given wheelbarrows full of and free reign to get anything they needed. We also delivered supplies. And it says, when FEMA finally started handing out boxes of canned goods, limited to one per household, we were filling cars of food and supplies for people and pets. There is so much more to the story. So my point is this happens every time. Every single time. So thank you, Ryan, for pointing this out. I think it's important that we recognize that this is not unique to the situation, but it's very important that we change that dynamic because it doesn't ever change, which is kind of my point I keep making. Sal Diagras points out, here's Buttigieg saying, drone pilots, don't fly over the house. Don't fly over the recovery area. Now, I think you can obviously hear what they might say. We're flying operations in to help and you might get in the way. Well, clearly you're not, though. Not really. Either way, I don't agree with that. Whether or not there's a liability issue, the point is the same. I think it's about making sure like they don't rapidly reconnect communication, is they just kind of don't want this to be seen because there's always ways we can criticize their response. And they know that. even if it's unjust. So they just don't want you to be able to do so. If that's what's happening, you can decide for yourself. But not allowing the drone flights in kind of seems like the same thing. Now, realize they could literally be flying things in with drones, but they're not. And Sal says, as I agree, they'd prefer you died. You will always be, at best, an inconvenience to the political class. That's not left or right. As he says recently, there's no red, there's no blue. There is the state and there is you. That's the reality. Now, axiomatic enemy of the state says without government, who would threaten to throw you in a cage for helping people in distress, right? Got to have that. Obviously, a little bit of humor on the sad, the kind of macabre side of it. But he's making a good point. Who else would throw you in jail for being a human being? True History Media makes the point about the FEMA or TEMA, which is the Tennessee emergency, same thing from Tennessee. As she writes, all the people saying that FEMA didn't or wouldn't say that they won't allow donations, even though we just showed you a previous example, this is their post. Affected counties are beginning to establish local donation and volunteer reception centers. And it says, please visit the link. It says, while local communities appreciate the volunteer spirit, please do not, in capitals, send donations that have not been requested by the state. How in the world does anybody make sense of that? Especially while right now, as you'll hear from people, again, taking with a grain of salt that there could be, they could be misinformed, they could be the only one, they could be lying, not assuming that. In fact, I would say, well, the logical way to look at this is accepting what they're saying, but keeping in mind that they could be misinformed, right? The point, nonetheless, they're telling you we don't have enough. We're struggling right now. And they're turning away stuff? Well, yes, that's crazy. But again, not unique to the situation. But that blows my mind that we pretend like it's always been happening. And like he just said, what else could it be but money? Now, just to show you, but the same thing's happening. I've seen a lot of these. This is insulin, at least according to Foxy Farmer, being delivered by pack mule. Literally by pack mule. The point is that whether this is, these are videos we're finding on Twitter, there's a lot of examples of people who are, trying to bring boats in, and many of the cases being turned down. But people are trying. And I just want to use that as a point to highlight that this is the powerful nature of just, human resilience. The people that are saying, you know what, screw you, government. We don't care that you're telling us we're not allowed to help people. We're going to help them anyway. That's what inspires me. And that is happening. So all that being said, let's talk about the idea of the funding part of this, because this is, in my opinion, the most obviously provable part that should outrage everybody. As Chief Nerd writes today, this is Kamala Harris saying $750 for Americans. It says today, $750. Oh, hold on. I thought it was subtitles. Yeah, that's all she's saying. Right. So here's, less than $1,000 in a time when, it's like, here, get some gumballs in the reality of the world today. Obviously that's more facetious, but that's pretty wild. Now, even if you think that's somehow enough for people who are struggling in a disaster zone, what Chief Nerd writes, of course, is $750 for Americans. 6 days ago, $2.4 billion for Ukraine. And let's scroll down so we can include, oh, wait, no, there's nothing else. I'm sorry. I thought there was more to be read. I'm being facetious, obviously. I said, did you just forget to include the hundreds of billions of tax dollars going to Israel since October 7th alone? Of course not. As Michael points out, the anti-war party is always entirely relaxed about financing Israel. Exactly. Here's Benny Johnson. Kamala just told us 750. We also send billions to Ukraine. It's just funny to me that, they can make that point, but then kind of like across the board, not concerned about the Israel funding. Well, wouldn't that be the same point? Well, it wouldn't, because they are agreement. They are okay with that. You see, the point shouldn't be about which war you're okay with. It should be about whatever, even if you agree with the wars, that money is going over there, but not to you. But you see, it's very, very telling. It is a very conspicuous omission. The silence is deafening to not include that point, because it would make it's the same point. You should just simply say foreign policy funding, but there's a reason that all of these Republicans are not highlighting the Israel funding. I'm sure you can piece that together, which is pretty disgusting, I think. But here's Isabella Maria Dulucu pointing out something important, the real picture. She says, so far this year, the United States has given, and again, these are numbers that I'm sure there's always kind of an ebb and flow to this, whether they're including all the funding that went to tangible groups or the aid versus military. It's always the game, but generally the point is the same. This is just crazy amount of money we're talking about to Ukraine in general. $24 billion, $400 million to Ukraine, which, to be clear, that's my point here. Israel is a hell of a lot more than that. So just in general, so you know, just in the last few weeks, the U.S. gave another $20 billion to Israel, just Israel. A week before that, the U.S. gave them $3.5 billion. Prior to that, they gave them $17 billion, about a month before that. That's nearly $50 billion just in the last few months. And October 7th was a year ago. So I just want to make sure we understand that this is not, it's weird how the numbers get manipulated around Israel more than anybody else. It's very obvious why. But 11 billion is not the full picture, okay? But so my point is it's more than Ukraine, but that's when but the people on the right don't want you to highlight that. Obviously, Israel would be the obvious right point, seeing as how more money's gone to Israel than anybody else, but they're okay with it. The same point. But to what they're pointing out here, 24 billion, over 50 billion going to Israel, almost 2 billion to Ethiopia, 1.6 billion to Jordan, 1.4 billion to Egypt, 1.1 million to Afghanistan, 1.1 to Somalia, $1 billion to Yemen, $987 million to Congo, $896 million to Syria, $9,000 as they're writing per illegal immigrant that's entered the U.S. Now, you can go into that as you want. There's all sorts of political nuance to that conversation, but nonetheless, the point's the same. Why is your government giving money to either illegal immigrants or foreign countries or anything else while Americans are suffering? That's not a racist point. That's just an objective reality. They're the U.S. government. Americans are struggling and they're dumping money in anyone's hands other than Americans. I mean, it's the same during COVID-19, giving you a insulting check for a small amount of money when the largest transfer of wealth in this country's history took place in the hands of elitist oligarchs because of Donald Trump, and it would have been Biden the same if he was there at that time. That is a huge point. Obviously, we should scream about how they're not helping Americans while dumping this much money in foreign hands, especially while they're committing a genocide, or especially while they're a neo-Nazi government. But that's not the focal point. It should be, though. It is for a lot of people, at least as a part of it. But and then she writes, and Americans who have lost everything to Hurricane Helene will be getting $750 from FEMA. That is really crazy. There's nobody should be trying to pretend there's some kind of nuance to that. That is just straight up outrageous. Now, this is a New York Post article, which I got to be honest, more than any platform right now in the context of Israel and the foreign policy, the New York Post is showing itself to be the National Enquirer. Like really disgustingly bad. They've been caught like just more than, I think, almost the sole parrot of what Israel keeps saying in many of these recent discussions that have later turned out to be exact opposite. But the New York Post just said what Israel said. So I just want to make sure we remember that. I think Robert's going to be working on art. There's a new story that came out today that, I mean, it's just cartoonish about a girl that was kidnapped by ISIS and then given to Hamas and then just got rescued. And to the best of our understanding and research so far is a ridiculously false story. But Robert's investigating. We're going to come out with that, I think, soon. The point, though, is that that's a New York Post article is the point. But this is an article from the 3rd from today. Feds say there's no money left to respond to hurricanes. Now, that is what is being said. I don't think they're saying because we sent money on immigrants. That's how they're framing it. But it's still a fair point. The idea that but see, my framing would be what I was just saying. Whether it's migrants, whether it's foreign governments, whether it's military spending, none of this should be happening if they're barely not helping Americans, because that's your money. But we should know this by now. They don't care about you. So whatever the discussion, the point is that they're going, well, sorry, sorry. Really? So you can print money and just dump money in the hands of foreign genocidal governments whenever you want because it's just a fake fiat money? But not when you need it, not when schools need textbooks. No. We're going to see my point. It's insulting. And we all know that. Left or right or the reality of the uniparty of all of them, not the unity party. They're all the same thing. They don't care about you. And I know they would love to pretend that like Trump, if he was there, he would do it. I don't know why you guys have this opinion. He has a track record. It's pretty clear. There was examples. We just talked about Texas, right? There's examples where he's in power where the same exact thing happens. And even more so where you're signing pledges to Israel to get that aid. That should matter to you. Just a thought here, who, by the way, I have an article she sent to TLAV that I'm going to be publishing soon. Just have been so much going on. I haven't had a chance. And anyway, we're going to get to these, a lot of different things coming soon. But I really respect her opinion. I think she's very insightful. She says, it's really, really important that you understand what is happening here. We are experiencing a controlled demolition of our government. They are exposing their own corruption. Now, again, you can agree with or not whether this is why, but what she gets at is, I agree. The point is whether you think it's controlled demolition and they want you to see that, you decide for yourself. But I think it's a valid point to consider. They are exposing their own corruption and hatred of the people. They want you to scream for their dismantlement. And this is kind of the engineered collapse, right? She's saying we should dismantle our government, but we should not look to technocrats to take their place, which I see everywhere right now, which is exactly what the plan is, she says. Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and the like will step in and the people will cheer them on. Scary how real that seems to be happening. Beg for their help. But what they'll usher in, digital IDs, CBDCs, biometrics to cross the border, brain chips, millions of satellites, Starlink, which, by the way, I'll show it next. For more surveillance, drone warfare, remote shutdown of cars and the internet will be like something from a terrifying dystopian sci-fi film. But this is not a sci-fi film. This is happening. There are billions being funneled into all of this and more. There's no denying it. Please have discernment in these days, in the days and weeks and the months, the years to come. You're going to need it. And she's highlighting this. Same thing we're just showing you, right? The idea that this is, the point is there is a level of reality here. I mean, it's not just a level. This is the reality, not the part of no money, that we're dumping money in wars around the world and don't have enough for Americans. And her point is they're kind of going, look, the government's failing you, because they are. They always have been, but now it's being really highlighted. At their point is that's engineered collapse. Consider that. It's a fair point to make. But this is what I was going to say about Starlink, as the Cradle points out. And don't forget, I've made this point in many other discussions. Honduras, for example, as they deploy, Elon Musk deploys Starlink for Prospera and not all of Honduras, which is specifically something that is taking territory from Honduras. We've gone into the past, or Starlink in Ukraine for the neo-Nazi government, or Starlink in occupied Palestine for Israel to use to genocide Palestinians, or really, as the Cradle's highlighting, Starlink in Yemen, which just happened, a Trojan horse for espionage. I would even say for regime change. I think what it demonstrates is a precursor for war. Now, there's obvious examples where that may not be the case, because it can be used in any number of ways. My point is that I think when it's the massive deployment in certain locations, that implies something more than just we want to help people. Now, maybe that means nothing in this context, but they're claiming to rush this out for people in North Carolina. I just want us to think about this. Even if you think it's helping you in this moment, we should at least consider whether this is some kind of filling the role of what's needed, and now all of a sudden, realize that at least in my personal opinion, I don't trust what's being done with this. I don't trust that Starlink is in the interest of any other than the military-industrial complex. So just be concerned about, just because Elon Musk, don't blindly assume it's on your side or not the problem. It's all just your government. He is a military contractor. He is an elitist, oligarch, technocrat. So make sure you recognize that. And read this for yourself. But as this is deployed in all the current fields of war, maybe we should ask whether there's something more than just that correlation. And I'll leave it alone. I was going to say something else. But to get into the point about lithium, or rather just a land grab to start for the most part, I find this to be a very relevant point, because there is lithium there. And obviously, that is a monumental point. I genuinely think that one, if not the only reason, but definitely one of the reasons we see the Venezuelan efforts is the lithium. The reason we see Bolivia overthrown is one of the main reasons for the lithium. As don't forget, Elon himself said on Twitter, we'll coup whoever we want in response to taking lithium from Bolivia, which he clearly is invested in. He is an active proponent of electric vehicles. Weirdly enough, while the argument is that that's why this is happening, because the Great Reset and Sustainable 2030 agenda for all the vehicles in 50-minute cities, and Elon Musk is a complete supporter of that. But let's ignore that because we don't want to see how that connects. But starting here, David Icke points out on the first, and I've seen a lot of these. I don't, whether you trust the person or not, if all you're getting is this, somebody said this, or was a comment over here, you shouldn't just take it at face value. Consider it like anything else. It's a data point. But I'm getting a lot of these that I keep seeing circulated where people are saying, I just got this comment. And weirdly enough, what I keep seeing is other people sharing the same thing. So either they all got the same comment, or it's one of those things that's being copied and repeated online, which means that probably should be wondering what's going on. Not this one, but same point though, because he's saying email from somebody. Right. So just keep in mind, they could be lying, they could be wrong. But it says they have been offering me to buy my property for cash constantly, which I don't even know why anybody would doubt that. There's huge lithium deposits, one of the largest in the world in this location. So obviously somebody would want to buy it. And it says only one way in and out, nobody allowed to move. That's in regard to the current dynamic. Trucks with aid and supplies are getting their tires slashed so they cannot reach their destination. Now, again, maybe that last part's not real. Maybe he saw that and it's somebody else, or maybe it happened and had nothing to do with it. Or maybe they're slashing tires to stop the aid. Make sure we're being objective. Oh, by the way, don't forget, Derek's got an interview coming out with Ike very soon. Now, Angela points out the Kings Mountain, which is the location we're talking about, is smack dab in the middle of the flooded zone. Alber Marill, I'm making sure I pronounce this before, and now I'm going to screw it up. Alber Marill. God, how did I say that before? It's a very strange word. ALBEM. This is the company we're talking about. It's the corporation. Alber Marill. I'm going to say Alber Marill. I think that's what I said before the show. But Alber Marill Corporation is and again, largest stockholder is both Vanguard and BlackRock, which, by the way, so is Rumble for objectivity. Okay, it's funny, but I think I definitely feel this matters. But there's a lot of people saying it's owned by BlackRock. It just becomes simple, right? But if you're going to claim that, then BlackRock owns Rumble more than they do this company. Just make sure we understand the more stock involved in Rumble, but they're just shareholders. But either way, the point is they're under contract. Alber Marill is under contract for $90 million to mine lithium in the area, which is true. Sort of feels intentional. All that's what they're arguing. Now, certainly a valid thing to consider. Now, first point, without any other information, would be, are they taking advantage of the storm to swoop in and take land? Well, I mean, I don't even know why we would dispute that. In every single situation, if there's a storm or a destabilizing event in a location where there is somebody with value, or a property with value, there will be somebody trying to swoop in. And that's not okay. I'm just saying that's just the dynamic. That in and of itself can happen outside of any other conspiracy concept. That people, whether real estate agents like we saw in Lahaina, people are salivating about this stuff. So right now, there is billions of dollars under this land, and people are seeing an opportunity. So is it intentional? Which I guess the only way you could make sense of that would be that the storm was created, right? Or in the case that this point, that they're ultimately extending the emergency, stopping the aid to force them out. Now that would make more sense. But so those I say were the three possible dynamics. Potential of manufacturing a storm to do it, taking advantage of it after the fact to just try to force them off their land, or in the middle, maybe stretching out the emergency to drive them out of their land. All those are certainly possible. Some of them more so than others, right? But clearly we have to acknowledge the possibility of every one of them. So keeping this in mind, here's what Corey Diggs had to say. I greatly respect their work. Now, this is important because, again, here, this person said, does anybody else think it's weird that BlackRock signed a $90 million contract? Not true. This company did, and they're one of the shareholders, and that's only like 12%. Oh, yeah, right there. It's 8.4 for BlackRock, Vanguard's 12%. Actually, I'll just grab this really quick for context. This is the Rumble stock page, and you can see very clearly. Oh, actually, I take it back. I thought it was more than that. Maybe it's probably shifted since then, to be honest. But here's Vanguard at almost 7%, BlackRock at 1%. Same point, though. I could have swore that was higher. Let me know in the chat if you remember that being higher last time we looked at it. And these things do fluctuate. But anyway, the point is, if you're going to make the criticism, that it matters that these are shareholders for a company, then you damn well better make that criticism for Rumble. But my point is that all the people that to make the claim would omit that because Rumble is the one that they're using. So it shows you a lack of objectivity. Not anybody in particular, but just where that might be happening. But see, Corey points this out. No, BlackRock didn't sign a $90 million contract. That's just not true. The DoD funding Alber Marill Corporation, $90 million, and many others. BlackRock has 8.48% share, Vanguard 12.18. 2 years to obtain permits to proceed on existing a mine from 1930s. I'll go over all this in an article. The point is this is from an old mine that they're basically trying to revitalize, and it's an ongoing thing right now. It's not, as far as I can tell, there's one point I'll make about how they might just feel that it's going to be hindered, but as far as I can tell, it's all in the process. So the question would become, why would they do this if it was all going in the direction anyway, right? Just a logical point. But it says both have shares in Piedmont, just north of with permits, who is failing. The point here is that there's many others in these similar locations that are already, happening. But it says the DoD and Department of Energy have been on the lithium funding strategy for quite some time now. Again, in the article we'll read, it'll show you how it's just exploded, the value, which is now suddenly why this is all happening. It says, I could post a slew of links on companies they funded millions to. Here's the DoD 2023 to 2030 lithium battery strategy that Corey Diggs personally thinks is going to fail. Here's the link, Business and Defense. Sure. So the DoD is funding Alber Marill $90 million to reopen the Kings Mountain mine, which will take a minimum of 2 years to obtain permits. With links, the Department of Energy has, which by the way seems to be where Elon is gravitating towards, has funded Piedmont, or at least one of the possibilities, by the way, $141 million for mining in Tennessee, which they recently had to bail on. There's been a major drop in lithium prices, and it's hurting Piedmont and others. Now, there was a spike that went crazy, and then it came back down. So the point is there was like a big rush, and they all put a lot of effort into it, and then it kind of went down a lot. Now, all of a sudden, these things are struggling. Struggling is not the best word, but the point is if you invest a lot and it drops by half, you're going to lose money. But it says Piedmont already has permits just north of Kings Mountain, but still needs a zoning variance and a lot of cash. It says if and when Alber Marill obtains permits, which is in the process, their project, this is very important, their project plan sits south of the town, not through it, which is what everyone's reporting. It says, I wouldn't want it anywhere near my town. If they succeed with permits, it wouldn't begin until 2026. Now, of course, as we just showed you before, what they're showing you on the map is where Kings Mountain is, not where the proposed location would be. Seems pretty lazy, right? They're saying that's smack dab in the middle. Well, not really, right? Kings Mountain is in the middle of the storm, but where this is located would be away from that, which is still in regards to the actual storm. But just realize that it's when you can see a lack of if they're reporting that means they didn't do the due diligence. That means they jumped and just said, look at that, it connects. Be careful. That might not even be intentional. It could just be lazy. But the point being that this is an ongoing process, and it seems to be out in the middle of town, outside of it. And it says you can see the geological survey in 1942. And all these are linked, by the way. BlackRock has a healthy mining portfolio in a lot of locations, as does Vanguard, based on all evidence. Finishing, saying, do I think they steer the storm to hit this town? No. Do I think EV cars will be the future? No. That's their opinion. Regarding homes, this is BlackRock doesn't purchase homes. They invest in builders like this one, who coincidentally own 3 rental communities in Asheville, Fairview, and Black Mountain, all areas impacted by the hurricane. Right? So what's funny is if you came out and just said, they're not purchasing homes, you would get a reflexive pushback from people who think that's what's happening. But when you actually read what they're saying, they're adding to it. Right? The point is that maybe they don't buy homes, but they clearly have a profit motive to, in some way, influence the situation. So I 100% think that's what these companies are capable of, if not do actively all the time. Finishing, it says, for absolute clarity, read their comprehensive report on the U.S. housing market. Homeowners and mom and pop investors are kicking butt. There are a lot of misconceptions out there. Who really owns the U.S. housing market? Always doing great work. I'll include this one for you. Now let's go further on this. Here, by the way, is just an actual report from September. BlackRock Inc.'s strategic acquisition of Albemarle Corp shares. That's what we just saw. Same point. Was it 8.4, 12% being Vanguard, but nonetheless important. I do not want to diminish that. I think that's important. I do think, as we've talked about before, that BlackRock is a very important aspect to all this, with very obvious Israeli overlaps. But I'm going to include one of the articles we put out about this, one of the shows, in regard to the COVID-19 conversation, where they had a plan that they laid out before the COVID-19 illusion, basically taking over the U.S. economy, the U.S. Financial interests, and then use that plan under a guise of COVID-19. The COVID coup, the BlackRock takeover of American interests. That's who we're dealing with, and it is very real. But of course, you're not going to hear that in many cases when it goes against other interests. But here's one thing I want to point out. Because there is an easy overlap here in one way, which is that Albemarle Corporation is a U.S.-based chemicals manufacturer. They entered into a long-term arrangement with Israeli Chemicals Limited to supply global flame retardants. You know what the primary one was? They are the sole provider of white phosphorus to the U.S. Army, all the way up until 2013. The U.S. has supplied white phosphorus projectiles to the Israeli military, which deployed them in its assault on Gaza. Not even making a case that's somehow connected. I just find that to be interesting, that this company that's actively trying to take control of the lithium dynamic in this, and just the mine itself, if not more, which is kind of the argument right now, you can decide, that's a company that has been involved with creating white phosphorus that's used in foreign wars that are absolute war crimes. Just find that pretty interesting. And then here, Haaretz, Israel Chemicals entering joint venture with Albemarle of the United States. I just find that interesting. And that's the same point. That's about chemicals and white phosphorus. This is in 2014. Here's Jerusalem Post. Israeli space tech startup. And whenever you hear that, that's this tech startup, that's a Unit A200 overlap. That's what that means. They can now apparently locate lithium deposits on Earth. 2022. That's Astera. And there's two of them, in fact, doing similar things. I just make overlapping points I find interesting. Clearly, I think Israel has an interest because of their tech focus in regard to rare earth minerals, and so does the United States. And so that could play a factor in what we're dealing with here. On top of that, this is from 2023. One second. From 2023, Iran lithium field discovery to change balance of power. Israeli media. Just overlapping conversations today. I find it interesting how the point here is only to make the point that lithium or rare earth minerals in general, as we already know if you've been watching the show or plenty of others, are a central play. It's a huge factor of what's going on today. So you just have to see how this could be moving a lot of different pieces than just what we're talking about today. Now, in a larger point, I want to include the article about Israel's infiltration of U.S. tech in light of the pager attack, but realizing that there's more infiltration than we have talked about today, which I've gone over in previous shows. And one quick point on that, Declassified UK points out, the MOD admitted in answer to the parliamentary question that there were 6 Israeli military officers posted in the United Kingdom. Think about that. So not only are they on the ground in Gaza, they have Israeli military personnel in positions in the UK. You could read that as advisory, or you could read that as control. You could decide for yourself. Why in the world would there be Israeli military positions in the UK? Aren't we supposed to believe that's a little tiny outpost, a little tiny country? How could they influence? Yeah, you tell me. Very weird. Now, let's get back into this. For those that were asking, in general, Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and this is from the Alber Marill website, as they write, the area is well known for its lithium resources. And this is an article from, maybe some of these don't have dates on them usually, but yeah, this is from before. This is not super recent, but it's not old. It's well known. And it says, in fact, Kings Mountain, according to Alber Marill, is believed to have one of the largest resources in the world. Now, if you don't think that matters, you're not paying attention to how the world works. They could literally move mountains, no pun intended, in regard to how these things could change dynamics. That's a lot of money, at a time when that, amongst a few things, may be the most important things they're looking for today, over oil, over gold. Now, here's an article from Daily Mail. America's lithium boon hits North Carolina. This is from 2023. DOD to reopen Kings Mountain. Now, here's what's important. Actually, I should have probably done this article first, which we're going to go into next. You'll see why I say that. Because the point is, the history they outlined there is that ultimately this was a place that goes back to the 30s, 40s, and it was a big lithium mine. And ultimately, it lost its profitability, its interest, and ultimately it waned, and it stopped. It just went defunct, and they stopped using it. Rainwater filled it, and it just became a big hole with water in it. Now, then all of a sudden, lithium starts exploding again because of the focus on electric cars, and now all of a sudden they want to reopen it. Okay, so what happens is the DOD, the Department of Defense, wants to reopen the mine. And this is where the contract comes from. So your government is doing this for their interest, not because of just money, but much more. But my point is that, so this happened. They kind of reopened it. But then in between September and now, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of resistance, and they had to extend it out. Now that's the point of this. This is the same one from September. But here is a report from May 2024. So this is September 2023. May in 2024, and lithium giant Alber Marill's plans to reopen the mine will take years to complete. So the point is, there's a whole extension here where people are pushing back. So the reason I'm including this point is that I think there is an opening there for a logical conclusion for why they might want to take advantage of what's happening here or cause something, because they felt like this might not meet the needs of the immediacy of the fluctuating lithium price, which, by the way, again, talking billions of dollars, like that is something that might drive a lot of action. I'm just kind of skipping over a lot of back and forth, and it goes over in this article next. But the point is that the people in the town, other restrictions, all sorts of things started changing this dynamic, and it wasn't as simple as that we were moving forward. So now we're all the way to now, not just at May, but right to this day, where now they're estimating 2026 a lot. And even in now, the town is sort of pushing back in certain ways, right up until the storm. So it's not hard to see how there is an opening for that potential concept. Nobody should dismiss that. But if we end up where we can't prove definitively that it is happening, we should just lean into what's most exciting. Well, let's go through this article. Now, this goes back to, this is August 2024. The lithium boom, and they write, what's holding back the rush? The lithium rush in the United States. There's a lot in this thing you should read. It's basically an interview with multiple people. You should read through it. It's interesting. But let's go to the part that stood out to me. Now, I'm just going to skip the basic. I'll do this real quick. Here's who they're talking to. And I'm not going to go over each one of the names every time, but Hangley, co-founder of People of Red Mountain, an activist group working to protect indigenous lands. Larry McDaniel is King Mountain, North Carolina resident, who's basically speaking about the process and what's been going on over the period of time for 38 years. And then Daniel Green, he's a resident who's actually worked at the mine. Jim Pelenick, city manager of Kings Mountain. And then you got Rafe Sully, who's the CEO of Lilac Solutions, a California-based lithium extraction company, giving you kind of context and what might happen, right? So here, this person is commenting, and again, just to show you the first one anyway, that was, did I not say that guy's name? Hold on. Oh, so that's one of the interviewers. Sorry, so just confusing myself. So this name here, Chakar Bharati. So starting this, it says, but when it comes to lithium that's still in the ground in the United States that has some of the largest lithium deposits in the world, at least 14 million metric tons, according to U.S. Geological Survey. That's not just North Carolina. So that's one thing to consider. There's a lot of stuff in this that's just kind of, adding to your understanding. A lot of those deposits are in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Population, roughly 12,000, pretty small. Nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, about 30 miles west of Charlotte. From 1938 to 1988, lithium from Kings Mountain was a key ingredient in the whole range of global products. I forgot one reason why it diminished was because they found cheaper versions of it elsewhere. But it says things like ceramics, glass, pharmaceuticals, pacemakers, paints. For about 30 years, the region supplied, this location, mind you, supplied almost all the lithium in the world. That's a claim being made by this article, but that's think about how important that makes this location when this suddenly rises again. Very important to consider. Now it goes on to say, but by 1988, lithium demand dropped. The Foot Mountain Mineral Company shut down Kings Mountain mine. Deposits in Chile were cheaper to extract. Now the Foot Mountain, let me make sure that's actually what that says. Yeah, Foot Mountain, oops. That's what it was, F-O-O-T. How did I just lose that? There it is. F-O-O-T-E. Foot Mineral closed the mine, but Kings Mountain Lithium processing facility remained open. Today, now it's interesting. I wonder how they could remain open with nothing. What have they been doing this whole time? Not that that name necessarily has any meaning. I just think it's an interesting point. Maybe they had some contract for something we don't know about that had nothing to do with it. But anyway, so they remained open. Today, less than 1% of global lithium is mined in the United States. And all it does is coming from Nevada. Now, it says, sounds like the familiar tale of an American community, once home to important industry and good jobs, abandoned for cheaper materials and labor abroad. Now, this is something that we need to recognize. As much as Trump loves to say he fights for this, and I've seen examples where he does do that. My point is that all of them, in my opinion, would err on the side of what is in the interest of the government. And that's manufacturing at the end of the day, the price. So when they tell you we're going to bring this home, we're going to bring this new lithium plant to this location, what's going to change from a year from now? Finding a cheaper source and doing something else. Because they don't really care about you. They care about extracting the wealth from you at your expense, just like they do in foreign countries. That's my opinion anyway. Maybe I'm jaded. Maybe there's companies out there that are actually good. I don't believe that. But because I think my point is it's how the industry works because of the way our government operates. You don't exist, and if you're not cutthroat in this world in regard to the companies and how how they operate. But they make a point in this about the coal companies. I think I highlighted, maybe not. These coal companies, same thing. They come in, they extract, all the wealth gets moved somewhere else, and the people in those countries get nothing, and the counties get nothing for it. Maybe, they're promised the jobs and the world and everything, and they rarely get that. And we've already seen the same thing with the defense industry, right? Oh, we're going to do this in defense industry, and then they outsource to foreign countries. That's what they do. Now, it says Kings Mountain could supply 1 million to 1.5 million electric vehicles. That's what they're arguing is the positive thing to the whole thing is about saving the planet with lithium, despite the fact that I think we all have recognized that's largely a manipulation. And let's not forget that Elon Musk is actively said it many times. So it says stopping production of electric vehicles rather than fossil fuels is extremely dumb. Well, most of the people supporting Trump's administration disagree with that. But he says almost all vehicles will be purely electric long-term. Combustion cars will be niche like horses. Now, you can agree with that. But I think it's interesting that he's part of an administration that, Vance seems to be like outwardly against this. I find that interesting. But maybe you want to pretend it's because they have different opinions, and that's okay. I think we're going to see that's not the case once the administration starts moving forward, but I hope I'm wrong. But it goes on to say, as a result, the price of lithium has skyrocketed. In 2022 alone, lithium prices shot up by 400%, reaching a high of $50,000 per ton. Now, that's what started the conversation, right? Everyone was just chomping at the bit to get something like this going. But because there was pushback, right? September 2023, they were reinitiating, it was moving, and then it just kind of floundered a bit, and the price went back down. That's interesting because I think that's caused a lot of this kind of up and down, but it's still very high, mind you. There's still a huge push for this. But I think the realization that actually making a feasible market from this is not, it's like the windmill stuff or any number of these things or the solar. There's a use for this stuff. But to pretend that it can be immediately scalable has already been shown to be false. Maybe by design, you can decide. But it says Alber Marill declined an interview request, but it said that the mine will create 300 jobs and can open as soon as 2026. 300 jobs does not seem like a lot for what they're doing. But it says Jim Palahniuk is Kings Mountain city manager. He supports reopening the mine, but he says if Kings Mountain is going to play a major role in America's clean energy future, pretending like that's all it is, even though it's actually going to destroy the area, he wants more benefits to stay in this community. Now he says, I really feel for some of, that's where he references it. Some of those West Virginia coal communities where, you have a big open pit mine. They got great value, took it out of the ground, but not much of that ever went back to the poor or even the community at all. The West Virginia coal mining community. Why? Because your government exploited you, guys. The company was allowed to exploit you because the government allowed it. That's what happens. So we want to take a lesson from those and say you're not going to leave this community that way. Now, to be very clear about that, I'm not suggesting the government should always have a say over corporate actions or companies. But my point is that that's what we dealt with there. We've seen a, what's the word? I'm just blanking on the word. Incestuous relationship between the government and these corporations, a fascistic relationship where they do work together to exploit you while pointing at each other. Now, this says in 2022, Inflation Reduction Act comes with hefty electric vehicle tax credits, but they only apply, interestingly enough, if the materials used to make the vehicles, batteries included, come from the United States or nations in free trade agreements with the United States. Isn't that funny? So who cares? Like, here's what's funny. Let's pretend like you think that's all the right direction. That we should do this because we're saving the planet, right? But we're only going to save it if it's a group we agree with. Right? Does that make sense, right? We won't save the planet if Iran wants to help. We won't save the planet if Russia wants to help, even if they're the only ones wanting to help. We'll let the planet die because we don't want to work with bad guys. Okay. Doesn't that seem a little dumb? What that needs to show you is that it's not really about saving the planet. If it was, we're all going to die if we don't do it, they wouldn't be drawing lines on who they could do it with, right? My point, though, is that how do you make it only about coming from the United States? So what you're trying to do there is force the industry back into the United States, which will exploit these communities, even though I think we know this is not scale. So again, it's about you and money and profit. It has nothing to do with what they're actually claiming it does. Because if you really just wanted to do this to save the planet, well, you would have given them credits if they simply use it. But I think the point is that's not how this actually works because that's not what's actually happening. But it says, hence, the vast sums of federal funding, such as the $240 million that already went to Alber Marill Corporation, North Carolina, for lithium mining. Then it says, when we spoke with your colleagues, Patrick Donnelly, he described the coming expansion of mining activity in the West as so large, it makes the gold rush pale in comparison. So if you're ready for this massive mining explosion for lithium that's going to destroy, like you've seen what these mines look like in foreign countries, right? Now, you could argue that they would take more care, and they probably would with your country versus places that they don't care about. But I kind of don't, I don't think they care about any of us. So my point is, as if they're telling you this will pale in comparison to the gold rush that's coming to you soon, that should be concerning. And ask whether we think lithium is even what we actually all care about, as opposed to just what the government and the intelligence apparatus cares about. It could be the largest expansion of mining activity in the history of the Western United States, they say. It says there are 83 lithium mine proposals, 83 in Nevada alone. And there are 130 across the West. It's worrisome. Those are basically two kinds, or these are basically two kinds of lithium mines, extractions that they have. The Alber Marill plant in North Carolina, they're speaking about this. So the Alber Marill plant is the company that they're building in Nevada or in North Carolina, but they're referencing their plant in Nevada. And they're saying it is brine evaporation operation. It says, so what that means is they're pumping brine out of the ground. About 3.6326 billion, that's with a B, billion gallons of water are pumped out of operation every year. And it says, and the water is essentially evaporated off, which leaves behind salt deposits, which are then processed. Anybody want to ask what happens to the, maybe the 3.6 billion gallons of water that we might need? Sort of like how they don't care that we use gallons and gallons of water to frack that also causes earthquakes and destroys the mine. I mean, they don't care about what they're doing to the planet while they pretend they're saving the planet. Pretty stupid. My point is that this is clearly, objectively damaging to the environment, but the water seems to be shockingly relevant to where the world is going. And you realize that they're saying a year, let's just on the small side, 3 billion gallons of water from this location a year. What do you think that's going to do to the surrounding environment? Maybe that's why when you look at pictures of what they've done in these areas, that's what they tend to look like. Barren wastelands, because that's what they're doing. It goes on to say, that's massive. That's a huge land use commitment. And again, that's the thing. That's not just some tiny little group. There's a huge land commitment to what they're doing. And it says, and I don't have an exact figure for you, but I can tell you that both here in Nevada and in South America and coming to North Carolina, you can look at Google Earth and then see these things pretty clear from the satellite. So if you're in a community of 12,000 people, do you want them building some massive mining operation you can see from space that's going to, I mean, I don't think whether they promise to give kickbacks or not, I don't think anybody would want what's going to happen here. It says, so it's a significant use of space. Now, again, I'm not saying maybe they're going to do it a different way that won't cause that fallout. But my point is that the whether it looks bad in the surface, what they're taking from the ground, I think has long-term consequences. Then it says, what we've seen at the Silver Peak facility, for example, is that even though that's extracting brine, it has caused the freshwater aquifers area to drop. So what they're saying is, he asked about the brine. The point is, even though it's called brine, it's still natural water resources in the ground. It's not like the byproduct of something. So they're extracting water from under the ground, and they're telling you, we saw immediate examples of freshwater aquifers dropping. Is that what you want, North Carolina? I wouldn't want that. And it says the groundwater level in wells have gone down and springs have gone dry. I hope you're listening out there, because this is what's coming your way. This is because most of the places where lithium is being mined or could be mined in the future in this country are located within 35 miles of Native American reservations. That's interesting. Now, finishing, again, Elon Musk, many tweets about how electric vehicles are the future. I just want you to recognize one of the many points of showing you how if this was anybody else, people would be calling these things out. I think that's important. Now, this says, Alber Marill unveils its new details for lithium mines as residents ask, how do we benefit? I think there was only one point that I was going to highlight, but really, yeah, I mean, just showing you that they plan for a 1,200 acre mine, 30 miles west of Charlotte. So think about that. So as they're all showing you this location on a map right in the middle of the storm, where they're really going to build is 30 miles away from that. That's important, don't you think? I just think it's all these people out there jumping to conclusions about things. And even if they turn out to be right, the point is that we have to be clear how much of this is a problem. And I'm not saying this should be censored, but we just need to acknowledge that and I honestly think it's deliberate. I think it's to obfuscate and water down what independent media are genuinely doing. Here's the consequences. Then we'll end with the weather modification point. Water pollution. And that is particularly with brine extraction. Exactly what they say they're going to do in North Carolina. Water pollution, not just diminishing. It can contaminate freshwater sources. Chemical treatments used, and they're only 30 miles away. I guarantee that's going to have lasting effects. The process can leak into irrigation, drinking water supplies, as seen in Tibet and China. Sure, why would we want? I mean, you realize the idea of the only reason they claim that this is necessary is to save the world from climate change. That is clearly not even the reality. Now, we're absolutely destroying the planet doing things like this, which I think is concerning. But the game of carbon and we are being tricked, guys. I think it's obvious. Experts around the world are telling you that. Salinization. It says removing brine from underground lowers the water table, which we just read. Atmospheric pollution. Extracting lithium from lithium-rich clays involves atmospheric pollution from processing minerals and chemical reactions. Land degradation. Lithium mining can lead to land degradation, as seen in the Nevada project, which we just referenced. That's Alber Marill Corporation, where a giant pit will be created, potentially contaminating groundwater, leaving behind waste. Loss of biodiversity, which is, by the way, literally one of the things they're claiming this is going to add to. And it says mining operation can disrupt ecosystems, threatening local biodiversity. Social consequences. Displacement of communities. Health risks. Exposure to toxic chemicals, heavy machinery can obviously pose health risks. Economic inequality. Cultural heritage. I mean, it just goes on and on. Mitigation. I mean, it doesn't stop. And again, these are just a couple of random images, but you can see what these things look like. They turn places that might have been fertile into a barren wasteland or a chemical wasteland. It's sad, and yet we're being told this is the future, right? And who knows? Maybe you think it is. But If that's the case, then we need to acknowledge that we're not ready to take that step yet, because that's not how it should end up. Now, I'm going to end with this clip. I'll play really quick, not end, but I'm going to play this really quickly, and then I'll end with some links I'll show you. Because here's and I'm not going to take that much time on this because I think this is a very valid point. I don't know right now. It's up to you whether you think that this is part of what happened here. My bigger point is that this is 100% a real discussion. And I'm not just talking about geoengineering. I'm talking about literal weather modification, the use of all sorts of different things, whether electronic or particle ionization, like all sorts of things, or just using devices that pump things, atmospheric, what's the word I'm looking for? Like we talked about this in Harvey, the designs of these things that like literally pump like mist type things into the air, which have proven to have effects on the weather, or the things we talked about in South America, where car companies are using devices that stop the hail, but then have caused droughts for the surrounding areas. Like they explicitly prove, and so do all the patents, by the way, or all the real-time investigations that show you that they absolutely have done this, or the military telling you they've done it. So for someone to dismiss the possibility for billions of dollars seems a little bit naive, doesn't it? But my perspective at this point is that I have not seen, so what I'm going to show you from Dane Wigington here is this is why I respect Dane. He's a very, very smart person. He knows what he's talking about. But what he ends up highlighting for people can seem a little bit outrageous because they have yet to understand what's really going on. But I'm going to play his clip for you to show you one of the many possibilities. And he argues what you're seeing here is what's driving it. But again, I would argue, I don't know how you could argue that means you could guarantee, like you can decide for yourself. All I want to end with is the reality that this is certainly a possibility. And for you to come to your own conclusions about what ultimately went down, but do not miss the reality of the criminality or the malfeasance that is explicit in the first part of this conversation. And we should seek to change that first before we even get into anything else. But then, yes, get into the rest of this. So here's what Dane said. Was the Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just an act of nature? What do you think?
Was Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just the result of natural processes and climate patterns, or was it manipulated? The circular blue flashes seen in this video are frequency transmissions from the NEXRAD network of transmitter installations. All available science evidence makes clear that atmospheric frequency transmissions can and do have a repelling effect on air masses, especially if and when the air masses have been seeded with electrically conductive nanoparticles. The brighter the blue flash from a frequency transmission installation, the more pronounced and powerful the repelling effect on any air mass or storm in the vicinity will be.
Now, the question is, did they do that? Right? So, to be clear, what I would agree, what he's saying scientifically, 100% is possible. I mean, there are patents for these things. It doesn't mean, patents don't mean they're real or exist, but it means that at least they argue the technology is sound, or at least they think they could make it sound. And my point is what he's saying scientifically is completely accurate, but from my understanding. But did they do that? Do we have evidence of them seeding these things? Well, I would argue we have evidence 1,000 times over of cloud seeding, of geoengineering, of stratospheric aerosol injection, of exactly what he's talking about. But my question is, can we prove it now in this location before this happened? And if you can, reach out to me. I would love to talk about it.
Where there are no blue flashes, there is no transmission, thus no repelling effect, thus no resistance for a migrating storm. Translation: a migrating storm will be hindered from moving toward frequency transmissions and will easily migrate in a direction with no transmissions. So again, I ask, was Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just an act of nature, or was it engineered? You decide.
Which again is why I respect his work. He's not screaming that you think this. He wants you to make your own conclusions based on his scientific delivery. It's upsetting to me that someone like Dane gets such little discussion around this. I think it's the same reason that probably we do or don't, because it's not coming from some aggressive partisan side. But I'm going to end with these previous discussions we've had. This one goes back to 2020, this was actually not that old. Excuse me. I forgot I moved him around. This one, I have 2 interviews with Dane Wigington. This one's from 2024 in February. Geoengineering, nanotech, and biocarrier platforms for pathogen dispersion. It's actually really crazy. The opening clip in this is from his documentary showing you the patents, how they're using these planes to do exactly that. And he gets into this really alarming overlap. This one We discussed the kind of climate change lie overlap. This one's entitled Geoengineering and Climate Change, Gambling with the Human Species. It's a really interesting discussion. Now, this one goes back to 2017. This one is called Cloud Seeding was used before Hurricane Harvey. Was it responsible? Important to check out. This one was a show that I did for 2017. This is the one that really started my path on understanding how serious this is, and how obvious this is. I simply titled it, Weather is Being Engineered in the Gulf. Evidence that is hard to deny. Now, unfortunately, when I went to go check to see if the article these were in here, the YouTube was taken down a long time ago, but for some reason, I can't, the BitChute version just won't play. And I wasn't able to, it won't let me download it. I can't find it anywhere. So I'm going to try to find this. I reached out to BitChute to say, hey, can you fix this? So I can't find this video anywhere. But I wanted you to see it because this is the one that gets into this exact conversation about showing Harvey essentially being driven on and then powering up over the land. Hurricanes don't do that. And then we can show you using these thermal discussions of where it was being charged. And then you can prove where these little plants were, where you can see these little, it's very fascinating to me. And then even every time it went over a landmass, it seemed to get another boost. That doesn't make sense with hurricanes. You can decide for yourself. But I was fully convinced that there was something going on here. To what end? That's for you to decide. Then this goes back a long way to 2016. I covered this a long time ago. This was actually an article I wrote entitled, Government Quietly Admits Weather Modification. And all it came back to was an article or a little ad put in his paper. And it was a notice of intent saying the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Works hereby gives a notice of intention to conduct a weather modification program. That's like, it's not a joke. It's a very public discussion. And of course, everybody's like, oh, it's just cloud seeding. We all knew about that, except in many other contexts, cloud seeding is also denied as fake. It's just funny to me. But this is an interesting conversation. And I overlap that with government Q&As from HARP. And, it's an interesting conversation. I wrote this a long time ago, back when I was writing more. I should do more of today. And I will end with this one from 2017, Geoengineering. The U.S. history and cover-up of stratospheric experimentation. Very, 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 very easy to prove. And it goes long before the Brennan example of the CFR saying we're going to look at this, or Harvard. It goes back a long way, and you can very easily prove it. So should you be denying this possibility? Absolutely not. What can we prove that was the responsible reason, the responsible action for why this happened? I think it's up in the air. And I would love to see you guys send me whatever you have on that, because I'm very interested if we think we can prove that. But again, going back to the main point of it all, we don't need to kind of cobble together these three different parts to see that each one of them by themselves is worthy of conversation. So let's focus on this story. Let's focus on not just the suffering of people because of a weather event, but ask whether or not there's a government malfeasance happening here. Are they deliberately holding back aid? Yes. Are they stopping donations from unallowable entities, which I guarantee in some way overlaps with kind of foreign discussion like we saw with Harvey? But yes, they're doing that. That alone should be stopped immediately. There are people with food and energy and medical aid that are saying we want to help them, and they won't let them go. Now, again, they're going to say, oh, you're going to hurt yourself. But at what point did the government start making it their job to remove all danger from your life? Even though we know they don't actually care about that. They use that as an excuse to stop you when they want to. So, as always, partisan manipulation is everywhere. Discussion of Israel, everywhere. Omission of how it matters. I mean, every topic we've gone over today, it's obvious the partisan angle is desperately trying to slant it in their direction, which is why you watch this channel, which is why you support groups that are objective and nonpartisan. Hopefully, you listen to all of them, including them too, but come to your own conclusions and don't fall into one camp or the other, even if that's our camp, guys. It's important to make sure we objectively consider all perspectives, because otherwise you're choosing a narrative as opposed to, what's the right word? Invasively investigating. Not just looking into it, but really taking your time to dig through, which is why we do 4-hour shows or 5-hour shows like yesterday, because it's important to take the time to understand these things and not just parrot headlines, which is what everyone seems to do today in the partisanship. So thank you for continuing to support this platform, guys. The links will be included below for you to support. We need your support as always. We're going to continue to fight no matter what. So stand with us. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.